You're listening to the Common Descent Podcast.
Hello, Will.
Hello, David.
Hello, everybody out there in the whole world, and welcome to Common Descent, a podcast about paleontology, evolution, and the fascinating history of life on Earth. This is episode 214, and our topic is saber-teeth.
Yes.
Very fun, anatomical bit of convergent evolution. Saber-teeth are most famous for, of course, saber-toothed cats, the extra long, often blade-like canines that they were using to do whatever they were doing with them. But saber-teeth is a commonly reoccurring feature in especially mammal evolution. This episode, we will talk a bunch about saber-toothed cats, naturally, and we'll visit a bunch of the other animals, past and present, that have evolved saber-toothed canines, and talk about what else goes along with it and what they're using it for. This is going to be just a fun trip through evolutionary history.
This is a fun topic because saber-teeth are one of those things that are blatantly cool on the surface. Mm-hmm. You have extremely long teeth that are shaped like knives. That's just a fun, enjoyable sentence. But also, it's a really neat evolutionary question and paleontological, case and mystery.
Yes.
So it's got a lot of good stuff to discuss.
There's a lot of cool science here. So we'll talk about cats, we'll talk about not cats, we'll talk about Gorgonopsians. I know a lot of our listeners will be excited about that.
Yeah.
This topic, saber-teeth, and also specifically saber-toothed cats, were requested by a whole bunch of people. This episode's topic comes thanks to requests by Big Boss Man, Theodora, Jen, Jonathan, Courtney, Jamie, Tracy, CJ, Daikaiju, Matt, and Hannah.
Good suggestions, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for supporting the podcast by sending us requests for topics to discuss. If you want to support the podcast even differently, you can join us on Patreon. Our Patreon supporters fund the podcast top to bottom, and in return, they get all sorts of cool goodies like bonus content. We do live streams. We do director's notes. At certain levels, one of the things that you can receive as a patron is a shout out here on the podcast when you join us. This episode, we would like to welcome our newest patrons, Catherine, Robert, Alden, and Warm Sponge Bath.
Thank you so much for your support. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
This episode comes out right at the end of March, and April is when we are releasing Silver Screen Science.
Woo!
This year, 3 episodes of Silver Screen Science where we will discuss the science of the movies, specifically this case, Planet of the Apes.
Yes.
We will be looking at the original, the remake, and the reboot prequel sort of new franchise that's been going on recently.
Yes.
Tons of fun. We will be releasing 3 different Silver Screen Science episodes the first 3 weeks in April, and then on April 26th, we will have a Silver Screen Science live stream where anyone is welcome to join us to chit-chat about movie science.
It's going to be tons of fun.
It's an exciting time for the podcast, but there are also concerning events afoot, and there are lots of ways that you can seek support or offer your own support. We like to shout some of those out on the podcast. This episode, I want to call out to 2 particular places. One, here in the U.S., is the National Immigrant Justice Center, which provides support for immigrants in this country for all sorts of circumstances. And the other is the Researcher Support Consortium, which provides resources for researchers facing harassment and intimidation, which unfortunately is a widespread issue these days.
Yes.
We will put links to both of those websites in the episode description if you are looking for support or if you're looking for organizations to lend your support to. Those are 2 great choices.
Yeah, and good luck out there, everyone.
One more thing in the announcements. A huge thanks to all of our listeners who filled out our listener survey that was out earlier this year. More than 500 people filled out answers in those survey, and that is we're so grateful. There is so much data now for us to go through.
It's insane. That's so cool.
So thank you very much. We're not going to talk too much about it here, except to announce the results of the poll. At the end of this survey, we brought back, after a years-long hiatus, the Crocs versus Snakes poll to give our audience the chance to weigh in and let their voices be heard, and the results are in. I will tell you the total number of votes. Which one do you want to hear first? Crocs or snakes?
Ooh, I want to hear snakes first.
Snakes received a grand total of 242 votes.
Ooh.
Crocs received a grand total of 245 votes. In light of these results, I demand an immediate recount. I love that it's so close.
You three know who you are. You did it.
You did this. Is your fault. You did this.
You did it.
Three
you stand
people
proud.
wavered and were on the fence, and then they picked one.
They were never on the fence. They stood strong. They knew. They were waiting the whole time.
Thank you so much to everybody out there for lending your voice.
Oh, that's
and
fantastic.
Congratulations to the continued champion, I guess.
Listen, we're loud, we bellow, we make ourselves heard.
It's the year of the snake.
All the more reason.
On the year of the snake.
That's hilarious. Oh my gosh.
Fantastic. We'll make some celebratory posts out there. It'll be. Oh, I'll make a post, but it'll be like the end, the victory screen in Smash Brothers, and I'll have Coil
Yes.
clapping in the background.
Dejectedly.
Anyway, those are the announcements. Let's move on to the news. Every episode, before we get into our main discussion topic, we like to cover some recent news from the world of paleontology and related sciences. Before we get to the news that we've brought along, friend of the podcast, Amy Atwater, has published a book called The Fossil Keeper's Treasure. We take you now to our interview with Amy.
Yes.
Hello, Amy.
Why, hello.
Welcome back to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
We are honored to have you. Please introduce yourself for any of our audience who don't recognize you.
Sure. So my name is Amy Atwater. I'm a paleontologist. I work at Dinosaur Ridge in Morrison, Colorado, where I'm the director of paleontology there. We're home to the #1 dinosaur track site in the country and the original Morrison bone bed that produced the first ever Stegosaurus and other classic Jurassic dinosaurs. So I love a good Jurassic. Anyway, I recently wrote a book called The Fossil Keeper's Treasure, and it is all about some of my favorite fossils that have really changed the way we think of our planet and life on Earth. And it's been a really fantastic project to be a part of. It's a children's book, so you may have heard me on the podcast before with Weird and Dead. That's my podcast, which is not for children. I just want to emphasize that it is not for children. It's for your inner child, maybe, but it's not for children. Right. So just want to clarify.
You're hitting both ends of the spectrum.
Yes.
Great. So The Fossil Keeper's Treasure, which of course is what you're here to talk with us about. We've gotten a chance to look at the book. It is delightful.
Yeah, I really like it.
Oh, thank you.
While looking through it, I kept thinking, and this feels like a very cliche thing to think, but when I was a kid, I would have eaten this book up.
I had the same exact thought of this would have been one of my I would have taken this on like family trips.
Oh, yeah.
Because I used to do that for like car trips, like road trips. I'd bring my favorite books so that I had something to mess with. Even if I'd read it a dozen times, this would be one of those.
I was thinking of it. This would be a book I would continue to go back to as a reference.
Yeah.
Because there's so much cool information in it. And that's the kind of kid that I was. It was like, yes, my bookshelf is full of reference material so that if I forget something, I can go check it.
You're a tiny professor.
Because I was a tiny little professor.
Already, yes. I love that. I've met some folks recently who are like, I was that kid who had my own play museum collection. Like I played museum curator as a 5-year-old. And I'm like, you are are totally cut from my cloth, but I was convinced I was going to be a professional tiger trainer as a child. So it took me a while to find
Right.
paleo specifically.
Right.
Yes.
Not a lot of
But I would
tigers
have,
in the U.S., unfortunately.
yeah, but well, yeah. And that, I mean, that's the really sad part is I think I didn't want to watch all my favorite animals go extinct. So I was like, I'll just study the animals that are already extinct. And I won't have to go through the heartbreak of watching pandas and tigers and everything die. So that's dark.
It's very fair. That's very fair.
So, for our audience, give us a sense of what is in this book. So if they get this book, if they pick up this book, what are they going to find when they open it up?
Oh, I hope they'll be delighted. I mean, it's very aesthetically pleasing. It's a beautiful book. I did not do the illustrations. I wrote the words. The illustrator is Nat Cardozo, who's based out of Uruguay, and did such a phenomenal job. So really the thing that folks are noticing are how beautiful it is. And it's kind of scrapbook style. So every page takes you through a different organism and it just has little blurbs. So like what you're saying about it being a reference is true, is like my son is a year and a half right now. So he just flips through the pages to touch all the fossils because they're raised embossed fossils. So everyone gets a chance to touch them. But then I have a 9-year-old nephew who loves reading all of the details and that he can go back through it and read a different little box each time because his little sister wants to just go to the next page. So there's something to be seen every time you read it and on every spread. So it starts with some of the oldest fossils that we have, trilobites, and it goes through time. And the youngest one is Smilodon, so a saber-toothed cat. And I really wanted to feature a whole different variety of different life forms, not just vertebrates, not just things with backbones, and also fossils from all over the world, not just North America, not just Europe. And it's really kind of like a starter kit for paleontologists. We have information about what the different fossils are, how they form before you dive into the different pages. And it ends with a great timeline. So if you want to time travel and understand where in geologic time these animals are coming from, you can pull that up for a reference as well.
Yeah, I love the time scale at the end.
Yeah, that was really cool.
It's such a cool, like, baby's first geologic time scale.
Yes,
it's great.
Well, I had a similar thought about the fact that each organism you move through time, what it brought to mind for me, and this is definitely part of my nostalgia of looking at a kid's paleo book again, was it made me think of the Fantasia, the Rite of Spring, Disney's Fantasia, going through the time periods in that very artistic way.
Yeah.
And, this is updated information, so it's more correct than that one was, but it still has that same feeling of going through Earth's history and getting to see a variety of creatures and the weird creatures that started early on and like.
This one does take plate tectonics into account. So, I have that on Fantasia.
Exactly.
Your T-Rex isn't fighting a Stegosaurus.
Correct. Yes. Nope. We try to avoid that. But yeah, it's really, I mean, it just, I was absolutely thrilled with how everything comes together. And, one of my sayings that I've had for a very long time doing a lot of science communication is that every fossil tells a story. And I piggybacked that off of a quote from a geology professor of every rock tells a story. And I was like, you know what? I can apply that for fossils too. And so every page, not only is it cool to look at and learn about, but it tells you something new about life on Earth. Trilobites, these were some of the first organisms that were visible and that were dominating the oceans before land was even or animals were even on land. We have Plesiosaurus in here. A lot of this is very much inspired by my girl, Mary Anning, who is a big role model of mine. So I like to tell all the kids about the Plesiosaurus spread and how people didn't believe that this animal existed and it was a real fossil because the concept of extinction was novel for that time. And so they were like, well, this woman clearly faked this fossil. And she was like, no. And it took, a career to prove that she was correct in this. And like trying to get that across to kids who just obviously just like, oh yeah, extinct. Just like, hey, we didn't always know that animals went extinct. How wild is that? And this fossil helped us understand that animals went extinct, can go extinct, and that our planet is very old.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yes.
love that there's not just Earth history in this book, there's a bit of science history.
Yes.
And Mary Anning gets a shout out, and some other scientists' names get dropped in there. I was not at all surprised to see Mary Anning's name show up because, of course, that's kind of the
Yes.
brand.
Yes. Yes, guilty.
I also love, we mentioned it a few times already. I want to focus on the art for a second because the art is
Yes.
so beautiful.
It's really cool.
One of the things that I love so much about it is that each page isn't just like, well, we're talking about trilobites, here's a picture of a trilobite. It's here's a trilobite in its ecosystem.
Yeah.
So every page is a paleo environment, and it's the kind of thing that I, as a kid, would have spent just tons of times looking at everything on the page because there's all these cool details. And once you start getting familiar with paleontology, it's the kind of book that I would have opened and pointed at and named all of the creatures that are on there. So it's got this almost like a Where's Waldo quality to it.
Yes.
It's so engaging to look through these illustrations.
Yes, absolutely.
Speaking of things that are in the illustrations, I did notice that, and our podcast fans will be thrilled to hear this, on the T-Rex page, there is both a croc and a snake present among the ecosystem.
As they should be.
Side by side, so we're represented.
Good. Here, maybe I'll say that was totally just for you. Definitely.
That's for us. That's the little Common Descent Easter egg.
We thought so.
There we go. Yeah.
Obviously, Nat's a big fan.
Yep.
Yeah, and their Easter eggs throughout. A lot are actually dedicated to Megan, my co-podcaster, that are great. In the Dimetrodon spread, I'm really glad that there's a little Diplocaulus.
Yeah.
So I also wanted to focus on fossils from all over the world, like I said. So the Smilodon is actually a South American Smilodon because it was in both the Americas, and I feel like the La Brea ones get all the attention, but I really wanted to have a South American animal in here too. So there's a Glyptodont, giant ground sloth, a Leptoptern. There's all sorts of weird, South American mammals that don't get a lot of attention that are getting, I think, a little bit of spotlight by having these different spreads. Plus, my artist is from South America, so I couldn't have I had to include a South American fossil.
Yes.
And the other thing, and you mentioned this already, the pages they're tactile.
Yes.
So every page you can feel this fossil. The page is embossed to feel like an ammonite shell or a skull or whatever the fossil is.
Yes. So, one of the greatest joys that we get as paleontologists is to touch fossils. I mean, it's not, one of my best hooks is, have you ever touched a dinosaur bone? And most people are like, no, right? Like, when do you get a chance to touch dinosaur bone? And so this book, like this tactile element, is to give folks an idea of what it is like to touch these fossils. And also, we're all very different learners, and some folks are just more tactile. Some folks have vision issues. Many of us are neurodivergent. We need different things to stimulate us. And it's really cool to be able to have this physical, three-dimensional aspect of it. And like you said, every page has like the environment, and then this little cutaway where it's like, okay, but what is the fossil? So like Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, has the beautiful reconstruction of her environment, but also, her skeleton, this absolutely game-changing skeleton of this early human fossil. So it's cool to see both versions of it,
Yes.
Yeah, I love that approach of this is such an essential part of the paleontology experience that you don't always get. It reminds me when COVID first hit, I was talking to one of our geology professors at our university who was putting together online classes and virtual labs and was trying to tackle the question of how do you teach introductory geology without people being able to physically handle the specimens. That's such a big part of it. And especially because he had some students who had vision issues, who needed accommodation for not being able to see very well. I don't know if they were blind, but they had some sort of visual accommodations needed. And he was like, how do you even do that? Because there is such a tactile element to it. And the thought that like little kids who maybe can't see very well or who have just never gotten to do this before get to feel the fossils that's so great to have in a book.
Yeah, it connects another sense to that memory.
Yeah, next one I want to scratch and sniff. How cool would that be?
Yeah, get some coprolites in there.
You can do one that's the tongue test.
Yeah,
does it stick to your tongue?
Does it stick to your tongue?
Can you get porous pages?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really exciting to be able to do that with books, and yeah, it just makes it, again, like, I think that, I love that paleontology encourages such curiosity and wonder, and I want everybody to be able to participate regardless of their background, regardless of where they're coming from. And a big part of why I was inspired to do this, besides the fact that I have a kiddo and I want him to be this curious steward of our planet. And also, I think a lot about, all scientists today, like, they all started out as curious kids at some point. And fossils are these incredible gateways to science and wonder. And I've been joking that, not very many people, like, our little kids being like, I want to be an endocrinologist. Like, they don't start with something super hyper focused. It starts with dinosaurs. It starts with volcanoes. It starts with space. And we should really be embracing these things that capture children's imagination and innate, they're so smart. Gosh, that's why I wanted to include big words and jargon in it, because to a degree it's defined, but because these kids are smart, and we've all met 5-year-olds who can say more dinosaur names than us. And this is really to these future scientists to get them curious and get them thinking about what great things they're going to do for our world.
Well, and I like this way that you are introing it to them, of like going with the thing that's probably going to get your attention most easily, but we're including different organisms than they might typically see, including stories of how the science happened, and starting to spread out that Venn diagram and connect more circles to it is how the kids can go, oh, I didn't know you could study ancient people or ancient mammals. I didn't know that was an option. I only knew about dinosaurs.
Yep.
So by starting to just add in those little bits, it can help them make the next step.
Yeah, I had one little girl at a school visit be like, I don't really think I'm going to be a dinosaur paleontologist. Like, the way she said it, like, being like, I know it's this option. It was just like this great little kid moment. She's like, I don't think I'm really interested in being a dinosaur paleontologist. Like, I'm rejecting your job offer. But I do kind of like that human thing you just talked about. So maybe I'll go do that. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly, like, that's what that's also my story, is I'm from a place that doesn't have, like, Oregon is not a dinosaur place, so I got hooked on fossil mammals, and now dinosaurs pay my bills, and I'm grateful and whatnot. But, like, it's cool to be able to remind folks that dinosaurs are really fantastic, and there are all sorts of they're a tiny fraction of all the animals that are extinct that can tell us crazy cool things about our world and could potentially help humanity. Like, we just don't know what science can do for us if we don't get curious. So it's a great way. And I got Tiktaalik in there, which I was like, yeah, Tiktaalik, yes. Yeah, like, I don't see a lot, It was really great to get some underdogs in this. Of course, T-Rex is in it as well, because I need to sell books. So, and it's an amazing dinosaur. I'm not going to sell it short. It's both. It can be both of those things. So, but I did want to get a good spread of different organisms in the book, for sure.
Yeah. So, Amy, where can people find this book?
Pretty much anywhere you get books. I've already found it on Thrift Books, which is really funny. I'm like, wow, all right, already used. So it's
people
been out
people are chewing through it.
I'm like, that's cool. I guess that's hot. I'll take it. So yeah, you can order it through, like, Barnes and Noble. You can get it through Amazon. You can also get it through a lot of independent bookstores. So here in the Colorado area, you can get it at the Bookies bookstore, Denver Museum of Science and Nature gift shop, as well as the Dinosaur Ridge gift shop. And I have been connecting a lot of my friends who are at museums, natural history museums, with how to order it. So I am hoping that it will be a common thing in natural history bookstores. And I'm also hoping to figure out a way, if I can ever get organized, to send and have signed copies available. So I'll let y'all know whenever I can actually sit down and figure out how to do that.
Cool. Fantastic. Well, one of the things I think very evident in this conversation is us three paleontologists still to this day have memories of the books that we read as kids that got us interested in this science. And so now there is this new book, this really with such cool art and great tactile interaction that the next generation of paleontologists can get excited about. Listeners, if there is a child in your life who you think wants this book, or heck, even if you want this book, it's very
true.
cool. Fossil Keeper's Treasure by Amy Atwater. Who's the artist again?
Nat Cardozo, and it's through Magic Cat Publishing. We're actually across 3 different continents. So the UK is where the publishers are. Nat is in South America. I'm here in North America. The book is for ages 5 to 10, but really, again, my 1-year-old loves it and I love it. So I do think it's for all ages. It does hit core curriculum aspects as well. And I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but I'm really bad sometimes at self-promotion. You can follow me at Mary Anning's Revenge for updates about what's going on with the book and where you can find it as well. And that's on Instagram. So that's probably the best way to be in the know about what's coming up with the book and other projects that I'm working on, is to follow me there.
Excellent. Wonderful. And also for the adults out there, check out Amy and Megan's podcast, Weird and Dead.
Adults.
No kids allowed. Adults
Don't
only.
do it. Don't at me. Like, I'm telling you, don't do it. No, I have a review on Amazon that I'm very grateful for. Please review it. I appreciate that. And someone very kindly was like, "Oh, Amy's so knowledgeable. You could listen to her podcast, Weird and Dead." And I was like conflicted, because I'm like, thank you. That podcast is really not for children. And I really don't want parents going and being like, "Oh, our favorite author does this podcast," and then just the F-bombs. So we just,
You're going to have to create a specific content for like teens.
Yes.
To bridge the gap so that people can follow you as they get older.
Well, now you have
goals.
Your listeners have a perfect thing to give their kids to occupy their time while they listen to your podcast.
Exactly. With headphones on so they can't hear it. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. I love that.
Amy, thank you so much for joining us. And congratulations on publishing this book.
You.
It's fantastic.
It's very cool.
Thank you. No, I'm very honored. Like I just really can't stop feeling really awestruck by just the community, the support. Like I couldn't have ever done this without other paleo nerds out there who also find fossils and ancient life and the history of our planet fascinating. So I really couldn't be here without so many fantastic supporters. So I'm very grateful. Thank you all.
Wonderful. Listeners, go check it out. Follow Amy. And we now return you to your regularly scheduled news.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
Thanks again to Amy for joining us on the podcast, and congrats on the publication of the book. Listeners, go check it out. Will, what news have you brought?
My news is about Megalodon, the famous giant megatoothed shark, and
I've heard of it.
New study with a new interpretation of what its body shape might have been, and therefore what its body length might have been. This is research by Kenshu Shimada et al. In Paleontologia Electronica, and the article is by Margarita Bassi in Gizmodo.
Check out the link in the blog post.
So, Ototus megalodon, the scientific name for megalodon. This was a giant shark, the biggest fish that ever lived, that we know of. It lived in the Miocene, and typically sizes for it ranged around the 40 to 50 foot size category. Its estimates have shifted over the years. They started to, as very often happens, very big and got slowly nudged down with more recent research. But we don't actually know a ton about its body because, as is the case with sharks, its skeleton is not bony, it is cartilage. So the only things that fossilize well are the teeth and sometimes the backbone, because the backbone is a tougher cartilage, so it can fossilize. But we don't have a full body fossil of Megalodon. So interpretations for what the shark actually looked like have had to go off of other sharks. And because its teeth are very great white shark shaped, Megalodon has often been portrayed as a giant great white shark.
Right, with the same general body shape.
Which is a fairly rotund shark. Great whites are not actually very slender and svelte like your typical sharks. They are actually a very bulky body for a shark, and that's because of how they move and how they hunt and where they live. This research reassesses the potential evidence for Megalodon's body shape, looking at The fossilized vertebral columns we have, specifically one they note in the article, is a 36-foot, 11-meter fossilized column from Belgium, which is the largest one we know of.
Wow.
They also looked at 165 species of extinct and modern sharks, 114 living, 20 extinct, and they made a point that they were not relying on great white as their model. They were wanting to look at a much wider group of sharks. Looking at all of them, they used the medium neurocranial and caudal fin proportions. So looking at the skull-ish proportions and the spine and the tail fin proportions of the sharks they were looking at, they were able to get relative trunk, so the torso area, if a shark has a torso, proportions for the group of lamniform sharks that they were looking at and that they were going to compare Megalodon to. Based off of this, and based off the Megalodon spines we have, Megalodon would have been much more slender and long-bodied.
Huh.
So not a chunky torpedo, but a long, slender shark, which is the more typical shark shape.
Yeah.
The article compared it to a lemon shark, if you have an image of a lemon shark. This means that off of that 36-foot spine that they have, that Megalodon with these new proportions would have had a 6-foot long head, 1.8 meters, a 12-foot long tail, 3.6 meters, making the total animal 54 feet long or 16.4 meters long. If they apply these proportions to some vertebrae from Denmark that are assumed to be Megalodon due to their size, these are some of the largest vertebrae we've ever found. Based off of those, that could be from a shark that's up to 80 feet long or 24.3 meters.
Whoa.
Which, estimating off of the size and shape of sharks, would have weighed 94 tons. Big shark.
Wow.
Big shark.
Big, but interpreted here as long.
Long, slender.
So, like you said, not like a great white, which is a truck of an animal.
Yes, they are thickly built sharks.
This would be much more like something like a mosasaur or an ichthyosaur, which are also known to reach similar lengths.
Well, and they note that our big marine animals today are slender bodied.
That's true. Whales.
Blue whales, whale sharks,
Yep.
basking sharks are not chunky animals.
Yeah.
They are slender, hydrodynamic animals. And that's one of the things they point out as, though this size seems ridiculous, the body shape lines up with an animal that would be that size, because an animal shaped like a great white, but at that size, would probably be hydrodynamically very bad.
Yeah. You'd have a harder time cruising around.
Yeah, you would be wasting energy swimming as a great white shark shaped animal at even the lower sizes for Megalodon, even the 40-foot sizes, probably would not have been efficient for that shape. You would want to be a more slender-bodied animal.
Right. And well, and when you're that big, every bit of energy saving is really important.
Exactly. They were also able to look at some other aspects of Megalodon, which are kind of neat. They reanalyzed the backbone growth bands, so the growth rings in the bones, and this suggests a birth size of 3.6 to 3.9 meters. So big babies.
Wow. Yeah.
Which...
So that's a baby the size of a full-grown great white shark.
Sure is.
Whoa. The length, I should say.
Yes.
The length of a full-grown great white.
Probably not the mass of a full-grown great white, but a big baby. And they said this lines up with interpretations of ovovipary, so live birth.
Sure. Which we see in a lot of sharks.
Absolutely. Which also likely meant that they were probably practicing the intra-urine cannibalism, or eating the eggs, potentially.
Embryos eating each other or
Yes.
eating the eggs.
But it means it's less likely that they would have needed a nursery situation,
Right.
which had been suggested for them before.
Right. Which is interpreted for modern great whites.
Exactly. Yeah, if you're popping out a 20-foot baby, that thing's probably pretty good to go.
Yeah. What do you need a nursery for?
Yeah, that is a shark now. It can pay taxes. So it's neat to get some of those insights. And the last note they made was that also some of the data from this analysis does seem to support the hypothesis that great whites coming onto the scene had an effect of Megalodon going extinct.
Yeah.
That
there
whether
was
or not
some competition of some kind.
that whatever it was, there does seem to be a correlation, and this research does seem to support that. Yeah, it seems like when great whites started to evolve, megalodon started to check out.
Yeah, that either there was some competition or the conditions that were favoring great whites were at the same time not favoring megalodon.
Yes. There's a quote that I like that said, many of the interpretations we made are tentative, but are data-driven.
Yes.
So, like,
we don't know for sure, but this is what the science seems to suggest.
This is good science, even if the size seems ridiculous. So there adjustments might need to be made, but this isn't just a harebrained, what if it was 80 feet long?
Yes. This is an interpretation of megalodon as the size and shape of a humpback whale.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, and with a long tail. That really because a great white shark's tail is pretty short as sharks go, proportionately, as opposed to something like a mako or like a thresher shark, obviously.
Exactly.
With that long trailing tail. So cool. Paleo artists, you know what to do.
Well, and it makes sense. Like, you can picture this animal cruising across the ocean, and even if it's not just aggressively hunting, if it's feeding on whales, but that this is an oceanic predator like oceanic whales.
Yes, like a sperm whale, except probably not diving the way that a sperm whale does. Very cool. Well, speaking of fossils, speaking of very well-preserved fossils, I've got a news about new insights into an extremely well-preserved vulture.
Ooh.
We've talked about this vulture before. This vulture came up on the volcanoes episode.
Oh, yeah.
Episode 131. Also in the volcanic fossils episode of SciShow. I did put a bunch of info about this vulture in there. This is research by Valentino Rossi et al. In the journal Geology. And we will link in the blog post to an article in The Conversation written by 3 of the authors, Valentino Rossi, Dawid Iarino, and Maria McNamara. The fossil is a griffin vulture, so that's Gyps fulvus, preserved in an ignimbrite, which is a pyroclastic flow deposit.
Yep.
So this is a pile of ash and everything else that's in a pyroclastic flow that came flooding down the side of a volcano and then deposited that way. This dates to the late Pleistocene, around 30,000 years ago. It is from Rome in Italy. It was discovered in the 1880s, and then a study in 2014 finally got around to doing a detailed examination, CT scanning it, and finding that this pyroclastic flow had apparently surrounded and entombed a vulture and preserved it in extraordinary detail. Again, we talked about this in episode 131. The vulture's head, which was the focus of that study, is preserved as a 3D impression. So it's a cavity, basically, the negative of the vulture's head within the ash. It is preserved so well, they were able to make out the details of the eyelids, the tongue, some of the texture of the skin. They said in that original paper, it is preserved in even finer detail than Pompeii. But this is an extraordinarily well-preserved fossil. Wow. Also preserved in this same deposit, but not examined in detail in that first study, is part of one of the wings, including a bunch of the feathers. This study takes a close look at the feathers. How are the feathers preserved here? What can we see? They examine it with all the microscope, x-rays, CTs, as many different methods as you can think of to examine how these feathers are preserved. And it turns out, not only are the feathers preserved extraordinarily well, they are preserved in a way that has never been seen before.
Oh.
Feathers in the fossil record are typically preserved one of a few ways. Either as impressions, pressed into sediment, a carbon film, so pressed between sediment but with some organic material remaining, or in amber.
Yes.
These feathers are mineralized. They are mineralized feathers the way that we typically think of with bones, but the way that we rarely see with soft tissues.
That's cool.
Now, these are apparently not the first ever mineralized feathers, but they are mineralized in a way that has not been seen before. The feathers are preserved in 3 dimensions. The mineralization of them is extremely fine. So they include microstructures, all of like the branching pieces, melanosomes, so the pigment-containing structures. The feathers are mineralized by a mineral called zeolite. So the way that permineralization works, as we've discussed before, is gradually minerals are deposited either in the spaces, the empty spaces within the fossil, within the original structure, or replacing the pieces of the original structure, either by chemically altering them or they go away and then they get fill in that gap. Zeolite is an aluminosilicate mineral, so aluminum and silica, known from volcanic rocks. So that makes sense. This is a volcanic rock. Zeolitization, like silicification, calcification, this is zeolitization, has, according to these researchers, never been reported before for soft tissue fossils.
Cool.
Which means not only, on top of all of the other ways that this fossil is incredible, this is a type of mineralization that has never been reported before.
That's so awesome.
The previous research on this fossil interpreted that what happened here was that the pyroclastic flow, by the time it found this vulture, was cool in temperature, or at least cool for a pyroclastic flow. It's estimated to have been around 100 to 200 degrees Celsius, possibly less, either because it had traveled a ways from its source already, or maybe it had come into contact with water. Something had cooled it, and being only a couple hundred degrees Celsius meant that the vulture wasn't just immediately incinerated by the ash cloud. Here, they suspect that in addition to that, the local pH conditions and the presence of silicon and aluminum in the ash allowed zeolite minerals to start forming. They note that zeolite forms relatively quickly.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
It is a mineral that tends to form, as they said, within days, which means that even the soft feathers were able to be mineralized before they decayed and decomposed away, or just fell apart. They do note that some of the structure of the feather isn't preserved, particularly the internal structures inside the rachis, the stem of the feather, and the barbs that support the feather. Apparently there's stuff inside there. I don't know what it is, but apparently in this case it's not preserved, which suggests that those parts decomposed too quickly.
Yes.
But the rest of the feather seems to have stuck around long enough for this rapid mineralization to happen. The feathers themselves apparently are orange-ish in color, which doesn't seem to be a zeolite thing. That seems to be hematite that later deposited on them. So the feathers became mineralized and then rusted. They gave them an orange color.
Wow.
So there's so much to this. I wish that this paper had come out before we did volcanoes and before I wrote that SciShow episode, because this is such a cool addition to this remarkable fossil.
And it's just such a complicated fossil in like how much there is going on. First, finding an organism fossilized in a pyroclastic flow is
wild.
That's crazy.
Yes.
But then for it to be the right scenario to get really crazy detailed fossil is also awesome. Also of an animal that are incredibly delicate.
Yeah, it's a bird.
It's a bird. And so we don't, like, most bird fossils are not that well preserved because they are made out of balsa wood.
They're made of bird.
Yes, and they fall apart. So that's awesome. And then chemically, it is a complex and unique fossil.
Yes.
The layers are just incredible.
It is worth noting that one of the reasons why maybe we've never seen this type of fossilization before is because we don't typically think to look in ash deposits like this. So the authors point out there could be other fossils like this, preserved like this. Now, from what I remember of the story of this fossil, it sounds like a lot of the vulture was preserved within these blocks, but it also sounds like most of that has been lost over time. That I think that the head and this partial wing are what remains of this specimen.
Yeah.
Which is sad. I don't know if that Igdenbright deposit is still accessible somewhere. If it is, go.
Yeah.
Go there.
Did that vulture have friends?
Did that vulture have friends?
Like,
That's what friends are for.
yes, it is.
Very cool stuff.
Oh,
Hey, speaking of predators,
Yeah.
cool carnivores.
this would be cleaning up after
This
them.
is clean. Absolutely. Yes, indeed. Hey, that's the news. Let's get on to our main episode discussion, where we will tackle the question of, first, what exactly is a saber-tooth? Saber-teeth, in the style of the famous saber-toothed cats, typically refers to a specific type of tooth. Not just any long tooth. Saber-teeth are generally extremely long and large canines. They are sometimes referred to as hypercanines.
Oh, cool.
That they are canines that have evolved into this extreme version of that tooth. As a refresher, in our mouths, the teeth at the front are our incisors. The pointy teeth, we have 4, 1 in each quadrant, are canines, and then behind that you've got premolars and molars. Saber teeth are typically extra long upper canines that stick down on either side of the lower jaw. These are different, for example, from hyper incisors. Some animals where the incisors, the very front teeth, are extremely exaggerated, like rodents, like elephants. That's what elephant tusks are. We're not going to be talking about those in this episode because, number 1, not saber teeth. Number 2, go listen to episodes 66, 107, and 203.
Yes.
Where we talked about all that stuff. This episode, we are focusing on hypercanines, as in, like I said, the most famous example, saber-toothed cats.
The ones named for it.
The ones named saber-toothed cats, which, though they are the best known of the saber-toothed creatures, they are not the only ones. Saber teeth is one of those extraordinary convergent features that has shown up over and over and over again.
Yeah, some ridiculously similar to each other.
Yes, this is a recurring feature throughout the history of life on Earth, especially in cat-like predators.
Yeah.
And not only, like you said, extremely similar, not only in the saber teeth, but a whole host of adaptations in the skull and jaws that seem to occur over and over again, that some researchers call the saber-tooth suite of characteristics. These include the upper canines being extra large and extra long, often flat, sort of flat, side to side, like the blade of a knife.
Yes.
Typically, the lower canines are small. They are reduced. The incisors, the front teeth, are often large, and the jaw tends to open very widely. Many saber-toothed animals also evolve what's called a mandibular flange. So if you look at the skull of a saber-toothed cat, sometimes you will see on the lower jaw, the chin has like a downward extension to it. Kind of like a little extra super chin on the bottom of but it's bone. It's part of the lower jaw. That is a flange that serves as support for the canine to sit against.
Yeah, it's like half a scabbard.
Yes, absolutely.
Runs along the inside of the saber tooth.
A lot of animals with this saber-tooth suite also have the lower jaw, the mandible, behind the lower canines is narrower to allow room for those upper canines to sit alongside of it.
Yeah.
This is very similar to what we see in, like, crocodiles.
Yes.
Where crocodiles, with them famously, it's the lower tooth, that big fourth tooth.
Yeah,
right?
I believe so.
Where the jaw has a constriction to make room for that big tooth that's sticking out.
Yes.
Also part of the saber-tooth suite is a short brain case. The brain case is shortened, and the front limbs tend to be very powerful.
Yeah.
These are all it's not just the upper canines, it is all of these features that tend to occur again and again in saber-toothed predators like saber-toothed cats.
Which is just very interesting that it is so consistent for a feature that we don't have anymore.
Yes. We will talk throughout this episode about the variety of different saber-toothed creatures, saber-toothed predators, also saber-toothed not predators, things that have evolved these features. One of the really interesting things about defining this in a technical sense, saber-teeth, speaking, as technically as possible for this sort of loosey-goosey feature, are canines.
Yeah.
They are the upper canines. And not only does that mean that, like, elephant tusks and rodent incisors don't count, it also means that saber teeth are pretty much just a mammal thing.
Yeah.
Because if you'll remember from, for example, our teeth episode 88, that division of teeth, incisors, canines, premolars, and molars, that's a mammal thing.
Yes.
There are other animals that have canine-like teeth. A lot of dinosaurs, for example, have bigger and smaller teeth, and sometimes even in the same position in the jaw that we might expect it. Crocs often have big teeth in the part where you would point and go, yeah, that is where I would put the canines on a croc. Also, vipers have giant fangs. So there's a lot of animals that have big front-ish teeth that are not actually canines.
Yeah, you'll see them called caniniform.
Yes.
They're canine-like, and they're probably doing the same job of grabbing and holding and piercing whatever it is they're biting, but not actually a different kind of tooth, just a slightly different shaped tooth.
So for this discussion, our conversation will mostly be limited to mammals, which is partially on a technicality, but also, even outside of mammals, we don't tend to see saber teeth in the way that we're going to be getting into them.
Yeah.
This is mostly a thing that mammals have done. Now, there is a whole array of animals that we're going to talk about that have evolved saber-tooth and saber-teeth-like features, but to start us off and to really start to get into the details, we will spend basically the whole first half of this discussion focusing on saber-toothed cats.
Yeah!
Saber-toothed cats are not only the most famous example of saber-toothed animals, they are also the ones that we've studied the most, the ones that we know the most about. So they are where we are going to set our foundation for then understanding all of the rest of them. So let's talk about saber-toothed cats. Saber-toothed cats are, shockingly, not just a loosey-goosey term for like a bunch of ancient cats. They are a specific subfamily of prehistoric cats. That subfamily is Machaerodontinae. These are the Machaerodonts. This is a subfamily within the family Felidae.
Yeah, true cats.
They are true cats. They are outside of modern cats. So they are not in any existing subgroup, which is why they're not saber-toothed tigers.
Yep.
They are not they're not lions, they're not jaguars, they're not cheetahs. They are outside of our modern group of cats, but they are true cats. Machaerodontines originated around the middle of the Miocene, so around 20 million years ago. We have fossils of things like Pseudailuris, which seems to be maybe ancestral to saber-toothed cats. Maybe it's a cousin of the ancestors of them. Pseudailuris comes from France. It has slightly flattened canines.
Okay.
Just the beginning of that sort of blade shape. Then we've got things like Myomachaerodus, which is from Africa and the Middle East, where we start to see the familiar shape of saber-toothed cats. Later, you get extremely famous and successful groups like Machaerodus and Meganterion and Dinofelis. All over, they were in Europe and Asia, Africa, North America, and then eventually South America.
Yep.
After episode 43, the Great American Biotic Interchange happened, South America got saber-toothed cats. You're welcome. These were extremely abundant and diverse and successful during the Miocene and Pliocene. Often in their ecosystems, they were the main group of large mammalian predators.
Yep.
So if you think of cats today, basically think of big cats today, but with saber teeth.
Yes.
All over the world, typically at the top of their food chain, and often in situations like what we see in Africa today, where they're not only at the top of the food chain, but they are all over the top of the food chain.
Yeah, there's multiple members.
In total, there are over 50 identified species of saber-toothed cats. These were extremely diverse. This Subfamily Megalodon does not make it to today. They go extinct at the end of the Pleistocene. We lose the last of them in the late Pleistocene megafaunal extinction, episode 25. The latest members of the group include two very famous cats, Homotherium, and one of the most famous fossil animals of all time, Smilodon.
Yeah, like, not only for being a famous animal, but that name is a really catchy name.
Smilodon is one of those fossil animals that's so famous that people know its genus name.
Yep.
The Smilodon, that's how you know when you're at Tyrannosaurus level that Smilodon is the saber-toothed cat. If you're picturing a saber-toothed cat, if you've seen those skulls on display where they are that dark brown color with just the crazy long canines, that's Smilodon.
Yep.
In fact, if you've seen the skull of the dark brown color with the crazy long white canines, that is almost certainly Smilodon specifically from the La Brea tar pits.
Yep.
Smilodon is extremely famous all over North America. They are the quintessential example of saber-toothed cats, although, as we'll see, Smilodon in many ways is an unusual saber-toothed cat.
Yeah, they're kind of an extreme one.
They are an extreme. They are the end point of the... kind of like T-Rex.
I was about to say, yep. A lot of our big famous fossil animals, if they're the big one, that means they're going to be weird a lot of the time. So not always actually the average.
As we have sort of gotten the idea already, saber-toothed cats were extremely diverse, not only in their numbers and sort of their distribution, but also in just the way that they were.
Yeah.
Saber-toothed cats ranged in size from small, like cougar or cheetah-sized, to tiger-sized.
Yeah.
Some potentially maybe even a little bit bigger than tigers. There were plains-dwelling saber-toothed cats, there were forest-dwelling saber-toothed cats. Again, kind of like big cats today, they were doing all sorts of stuff.
Which is something that some people may not realize right off that big cats, even though they all look like just a scaled up house cat in a lot of ways, are quite different. Like, tigers are not open environment specialists. They're not grassland specialists. They're forest specialists.
Yes, whereas
lions are, your cheetahs,
lions are also social, more
cooperative
so
hunters. Jaguars are up in the trees specialists, and like leopards and stuff, where they are very good at going up and down their environment. So different big cats are specialized, and when you look at their skeleton and their musculature, it shows. They are built. It's not immediately noticeable because it still just screams cat, but they are built different. It's like breeds of dog, where a Labrador is not built the same as a Greyhound, which isn't built the same as a Rottweiler.
Yes. I don't know if there were any, like, cliff-climbing saber-toothed cats, because there are cliff-climbing big cats today.
Yeah.
There probably. Probably. We might not have found the
yes.
fossils.
I was going to say, if they were living on cliffs and mountainsides, we probably don't have their fossils, or not many of them.
Yes.
So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Generally, it's kind of safe to assume that some saber-toothed cat was doing anything that modern large cats are doing.
Which gives me the lovely image of at least one of them had to love to swim like tigers do.
Oh, sure.
Just paddling around.
They're just flopping around like a cat. Now, classically, and I think we've even referred to this on the podcast, saber-toothed cats have been traditionally split into two general types of cat. These are the scimitar-toothed cats and the dirk-toothed cats, named after different types of blades. The scimitar-toothed cats, generally the canines, the saber teeth, are shorter and thicker. They are serrated, and these cats tend to be more slender, more lightly built. This includes Homotherium, it includes Megalodon, it includes, actually, almost all of the saber-toothed cats.
Yeah.
The dirk-toothed cats are the ones with much longer canines, much flatter, so again, more blade-like. They tend to have little to no serration on the teeth, and these are the bulky cats. They are much more heavily built. This is pretty much entirely the Smilodon lineage.
Yes.
Smilodon is one of these, and its subfamily, or our tribe rather, Smilodontini, its close relatives. These are the gigantic toothed, saber-toothed cats. Smilodon was lion-tiger-sized, and its canines could be up to a foot long.
Yep.
12 inches, 30 centimeters. These were extraordinarily large teeth.
Unreasonably long canines.
Truly just showing off. However, more research over time and more fossils of saber-toothed cats have shown that these two categories don't quite work.
Yeah.
It isn't actually as easy as you're either one or you're the other. There are some species that are in-betweens,
Gotcha.
where they've got teeth and body proportions that are intermediate, so not clearly scimitar or dirk tooth. Some species show a mosaic of features.
Oh.
So famously, Xenosmilus, which is often the one credited as like, this was the first time that we noticed this. Xenosmilus has teeth like a scimitar-toothed cat and arms like a dirk-toothed cat.
Okay.
So it has short canines and beefy arms. So the closer we look, we see there are some trends. The cats with, for example, the longest, largest teeth tend to have the most robust limbs and bodies. But there aren't just two types of saber-toothed cats. There's a whole spectrum and mosaic of these features.
Yeah. Very cool.
Now, the biggest question, one of the most asked and investigated questions in the history of paleontology is why? Mm-hmm. Why do you have this? What were they doing with these We have cats today with long canines.
Yes.
Right, like snow leopards or one of those.
Yeah, clouded
leopards
has the longest two skull size.
Yes. Their canines are quite long, but they're not saber-toothed canines.
No.
They are not these big blades like we see in saber-toothed cats.
They still look like a fairly normal cat skull, just with notably, like, I would believe it if someone had shown it to me and just be like, yeah, this individual just had really long teeth.
Right. For some reason, this one grew long teeth.
It's not that far out of the realms of averages that I am fully blown away by it.
So the idea, it seems like they were probably doing something different than modern big cats. Now, longtime fans of the podcast will know that it is a trope both of the podcast and of paleontology in general that when we see crazy exaggerated features, our first thought is often, was this a sexual display feature, right? Like antlers and like elephant tusks and all that sort of stuff. Lots of animals today have large canines that they use mainly for showing off or competition. The first one that comes to mind for me is gorillas.
Yes.
Right. Gorillas have these monstrous canines. When they open their mouths, they're huge. They're not saber canines, but they are quite big. But gorillas are plant eaters.
Yeah.
They're using those canines to put on an impressive display, or if they have to teach somebody an extremely harsh lesson about messing with an angry gorilla.
Yes.
Now, some research has actually shown that saber-toothed cats, the upper canines, do not perfectly scale with the skull size.
Yeah.
They show what we call positive allometry, which means proportionately they are bigger in adults, which is something that we tend to see in features that have a display function in adults. We also see the exact same thing with the upper canines in modern cats.
Yes.
Because modern cats use their canines the same way. Right? When they do a big roar or when they're biting at each other to establish who's in charge, these do have some amount of sexual selection driving them, it seems.
Which makes sense. Absolutely.
For sure. But that is not the primary thing that modern cats are using their large canines for. They are using them for hunting.
Yeah.
This is a thing. We see this in, canines are great for grabbing at stuff. Dogs especially, those canines are great for grabbing and holding onto things. In cats, the canines are not only good for, biting and grabbing. Specifically, they are employed in the killing bite.
Yes.
This is how cats tend to dispatch their prey. They're not using their claws to kill stuff. Well, not big stuff. They bite.
Yeah, the claws are for grabbing on. They're not actually using those to slash open those hold, and then the bite finishes it off.
Yes. Modern cats, the canines tend to be, they're big, but they're not saber-toothed cat big.
Yeah.
They tend to be shorter. They are cone-shaped. So more like our canines a bit, much more like crocodile teeth, just a cone. When they are taking down prey, they use what is often referred to as a clamp and hold strategy.
Yeah.
They grab with the hands and then they bite. Either they're delivering a crushing bite that crushes the neck or crushes the skull. I always think of jaguars because jaguars will just punch those canines through the skull of their prey.
Into the brain case.
I always think of that clip. There's multiple clips of jaguars taking caimans and just pow right through the top.
Yeah, and you can see the caimans struggling. Suddenly they're not struggling.
It is a very effective and efficient way to do it. Other times, cats, when they're not just crushing right away, they bite onto the face and hold. And they're actually taking their prey down by suffocating.
Yeah.
They hold onto the face and block the airways.
That's the thing that's so interesting to me about big cats is that they have roughly the same gear and roughly the same kind of bite, but they'll use it in different ways. A brain bite, some clamp onto the windpipe, some clamp onto the front of the muzzle, and each are using the same kind of bite, but in a different part of their prey to kill it in different ways, which is really interesting.
Saber-toothed cats, especially the extreme ones like Smilodon, obviously are doing something different.
Yeah.
That doesn't work the same way.
Those are still going to be real good for biting into your prey, but if you tried to do the brain bite with one of those, you're going to have to start a foot away from your prey. That you can't achieve that same bite.
This is a topic that has gone through many hypotheses over the years. Some very famous classic ideas. Old school classic ideas is that they were using them as stabbing or slashing tools.
Yeah.
Potentially even with the mouth closed.
Yes.
Just swinging the head and slashing their prey open. Other researchers have suggested that they were using them more like modern cats use their teeth, but specialized for larger prey.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Right. The logic being that those longer teeth will penetrate deeper to either get through the thick skin of a mammoth or something, or just because there's more space if you want to get to important organs.
Yeah.
The animal's bigger.
Exactly. That the heart is deeper in the body of a mammoth than it is in an antelope.
Yes.
So if you're wanting to reach something vital, you need big, long teeth.
Yes. This also seems to fit with the fact that they tend to have a very wide gape of their jaws. If you keeping within the mechanics of how the skull works, these cats can open their jaws extremely wide.
Yeah.
I think in Smilodon, the extent of it is 111 degrees of opening, which is preposterous.
They can almost get their mouth to a flat.
Yep. However, more research and more modern studies have consistently found that saber-toothed cat teeth and skulls operate shockingly similarly to modern cats.
Yeah.
For example, the jaws open very wide, again, Smilodon being the extreme example, but the actual clearance that you get, the amount of opening between the tips of the canines and the lower jaw, tends to be much more similar to modern cats.
Yeah.
Which suggests that they are probably taking similarly sized bites of similarly sized things. Various other studies on bite force and the strength of the skull and the strength of the teeth has found that they don't seem to be any more optimal for going after large prey compared to modern cats.
Yeah.
Which does seem to suggest that, some modern cats will go after big prey. Right? Lions will take down elephants from time to time when they get the chance. But it seems to suggest that saber-toothed cats were not, as a rule, going after bigger things.
Yes. Well, and when lions do go after big prey, they aren't biting into it the same. They usually just weigh it down.
Yeah.
5 lions on top of even a fairly decently sized healthy elephant is a lot of weight.
Yes.
And you can just exhaust it. And once it falls on the ground, if you keep it pinned down, you can take turns just starting to eat.
Yes. Well, yeah, that's the other thing about when large cats go after big prey is ideally they kill it first.
Yes.
But they don't have to.
Yep.
As long as it's not fighting back anymore, you can just start eating.
Yep.
And also, when big cats go after large prey today, they preferentially go after younger ones or weaker ones. That makes it easier. Also, like modern cats, those canines are almost certainly being used in some sort of dispatching habit, which seems even more so to have to be the case because they seem like they can't possibly be good for just eating.
Yeah.
In fact, they seem like they would get in the way of trying to eat normally. How do you eat normally with those big canines in the way? The fact that most saber-toothed cats also have very large incisors, they are often referred to as caniniform. They are canine-shaped incisors.
Yes.
Those are probably what they were using to take bites, like while eating. And apparently some research has examined just sort of the shape of the skull and the way that cats use their skull and found that the carnassials in the back of the molars and premolars that shear through meat could almost certainly still be used without the canines actually getting in the way.
Yeah.
They would still have to like work around the canines. But if you look at the way that like a dog or a cat will chew on something, they get it in the back of the mouth behind the canines anyway.
Yeah, so like it would be more awkward because you have more tooth to get around. But if there's a piece sticking off of the meat, then you can still just kind of eat like a cat.
Yes. So, surprisingly, for the most part, saber-toothed cats seem to have most likely been using their mouths more or less the same ways that we see in modern cats. They're not functionally all that different. The main exceptions start to show up when we look at the most extreme conditions like Smilodon. Again, Smilodon's canines are preposterously large. These are a foot long on an animal that is only like lion or tiger sized.
Yes.
And foot long teeth on that. Like when T-Rex has a foot long tooth, you're like, okay, yeah, sure.
But your head is as big as me.
Yes, exactly. These are not super gigantic animals. A lot of research has gone into the biomechanics of Smilodon skulls and teeth, testing out the stresses and the forces that they can take. Some of this has been done with just computer calculations. Other research has built physical models.
Yeah.
There was a study not too long ago that made physical models of these teeth and then had like blocks of gel that they would have the teeth bite into to test how they react and how they deliver forces. These studies have shown that the long, narrow canines of Smilodon are weaker.
Yeah.
They are more vulnerable to breaking, which, yes, that's something. That's one of those where it feels like we didn't need to do a study to learn that, but it's great that we have that official data. They are more likely to be broken, but on the other hand, they are extremely good at puncturing.
Yeah.
That study that did the gel biting found that large canines the size of what we see in Smilodon can puncture things with as little as half the required force of something like a tiger or a lion.
Yeah.
So if you need to bite into the back end of a hippo or something, Smilodon, the back end of some prey animal, Smilodon can do it twice as easily as these modern cats. All of this together does seem to indicate that they were able to use these for puncturing bites, but probably couldn't put too much stress on them.
Yes.
So the interpretation has often been for big cats like Smilodon that they would bite on soft body parts, the neck, the belly, probably trying to avoid skull or too much bone that could risk breaking those teeth.
Yeah.
And also that they probably didn't do very much in the way of shaking, like we think of with dogs, or holding with the mouth. Instead, those beefy, robust arms were probably really helpful for holding the prey still so then they could deliver that bite. And in fact, the other place where Smilodon and similar saber-toothed cats differ notably from modern cats is that modern cats, their bite is powered pretty much entirely by the jaw muscles. Smilodon seems to have augmented its bite with its neck muscles.
Yeah.
That the neck muscles would actually push the head forward to drive those teeth into whatever it was biting.
So it's less of a clamping bite, less of a closing like pliers, like our mouth and like most animal mouths that we think of. You're pushing the top in.
Yeah, it's like biting with a pair of daggers.
Yeah.
Just shoving those in there. This style of biting is often called the canine shear bite.
Cool.
As opposed to clamp and hold. This would probably mean that what they were, in much the same way as modern cats, will grab their prey and then ideally go for one, you have to bite, right? The best kind of bite is the bite you only have to bite once.
Yes.
One bite hopefully does it. But in Smilodon, probably they would hold the prey down as best as they could with their extraordinarily powerful front limbs and then drive those teeth into some soft body part to cause a wound bad enough to debilitate their prey.
Well, and it makes me think of vipers. We mentioned them earlier with their teeth. That viper, unlike a lot of other venomous snakes that bite and hold to get their venom in there, vipers hit, inject, and then release.
Yes.
And so I could picture a Smilodon wrestling something down and then putting that bite to whether it's the throat or wherever it is, and then stopping the bite, pulling back, but just holding on while you bleed out or suffocate or whatever it is that cause, whatever horrible fate that causes. And I just wait for you to go to sleep for good, and then I can start eating.
Yeah, or close enough to sleep.
Yeah.
This is distinct from, again, modern cats with their one crushing or holding bite, or even like dogs.
Yes.
Dogs and wolves, which often will grab and drag down.
Yeah.
Or they'll grab and shake to cause wounds and distress in their prey.
Yeah, and they're usually a lot less precise. I'm going to grab whatever body part I can and just start pulling you apart.
Yeah, which in some ways is more like crocodiles.
Yup.
Where the way that a croc goes after is it bites and then just holds.
Mm-hmm.
And if it can toss it back in that position, it will. If not, it starts throwing it around until a piece comes off.
Yep.
Dogs are a lot more like that.
Yeah, they are.
So saber-toothed cats do seem to be, they have a very similar but distinct precision biting style, potentially, that those canines were useful for.
Which is interesting because then it means like the steps of their hunt might look really similar.
Yeah.
Of ambush or chase, pounce and grab, and then killing bite, but the exact techniques in those steps might be actually really different.
Yeah.
But still getting to the same concept and the same same hunting mentality.
Yeah, it means they also might have had to have been more precise.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't just bite anywhere.
Yeah.
Because you'll break your teeth.
You don't want to hit a rib. You don't want to hit the neck bones.
Yes.
You want to go for the part that is going to slide right in. Well, it makes it feel more like an assassin's tool.
I was just going to say, you have to know your opponent.
Exactly. it's the scene from Gangs of New York where he's teaching him on the side of a pig. That's a wound. That's a kill.
Yes.
You need to know.
You go right between the third and fourth ribs. Now, again, Smilodon is an extreme case. Smilodon is the most exaggerated example that we've talked about. Some saber-toothed cats, for example, Dinofelis, another very common one, has canines that are shorter and thicker, more saber than modern big cats, but not nearly like Smilodon. And similar studies have shown that those skulls and teeth do seem to behave much more like modern cats.
Which makes sense.
Again, like clouded leopards that have longer canines, but not preposterously long. So some of the saber-toothed cats might have just been doing a bite and hold strategy similar to modern cats. Some, like Homotherium, are in between. So their skulls seem to be not quite to the same extreme as Smilodon. So they might have been using some sort of intermediate killing method. It might be that they could use the classic cat bite on certain prey, but maybe other prey required that more precision bite. So once again, this isn't one or the other. There is this whole spectrum of how these cats were using their teeth.
It's a great example of how anatomy and evolution can work, where very often there is not a drastic change that has to happen for the two different techniques and, body styles or skull shapes in this case. You could just continuously, gradually go, all right, a little bit more neck muscle, a little bit less jaw muscle, a little bit more neck muscle, a little bit, and that you will have an effective bite all the way across. It might be a slightly different bite here and there, and there might be some patterns that are like, all right, this one's kind of weird.
But
because
you're still a big cat with big canines, and that's going to work.
Well, and if you were to use that pushing your face down, that's still going to kill a lot of animals.
Yes.
It might not be as effective on all types, but that's still a bite. And if you can, just like how we point out that a horse can kill a rabbit with its bite if it wants to eat that rabbit.
Yes.
And its mouth is not designed for that at all. If you have a remotely effective bite, you can hunt something with it. You just might not be as effective in all situations.
Yes. And indeed, there are a number of places throughout megalodon history where we'll see multiple species of saber-toothed cats with different levels of that extremeness of the skull and teeth living in the same ecosystem.
Yeah.
Which suggests that they were probably hunting and eating different things.
Which is always so satisfying.
Which is very cool. This is also supported by the fact that we have evidence of differing diets in saber-toothed cats. Again, to use Homotherium and Smilodon, which are two of the most studied ones, Homotherium tends to be more slender of the body, less robust. Chemical isotope studies and the wear patterns on the teeth have supported that it ate mostly soft food, mostly flesh, and was feeding on grazers in open habitats, whereas Smilodon, which is much beefier, has been inferred to be a forest hunter. There is some evidence to suggest that it might have been going after bones. Again, not with the big canine teeth, but getting more into the harder parts of the skeleton. And they have, whereas Homotherium has been interpreted as being somewhat running adapted, not a cheetah, but this was something that might have been able to chase things down a bit. Maybe more like a lion.
Yeah, I was going to say, you don't have to be a cheetah. Lions are pursuit predators for a lot of their hunting.
Yes. Whereas Smilodon has been interpreted as what I have seen called a hyper ambush predator.
Yeah.
Which is like a tiger, but more. It's you get one shot.
Yep.
And then they're gone.
I've always pictured Smilodon as the pro wrestler just coming off of the top of the ropes.
Yes, yeah, just mouth open. Smilodon has really traded in strength for dexterity. Yep. Well, the opposite, the other way around. Smilodon is a barbarian.
Putting its prey in headlocks.
Yeah, absolutely. Another interesting question that comes up regarding the functionality of saber teeth is the question of what happens as that animal grows up. Because again, these are mammals. And being mammals, that means that they do a thing that basically all mammals do, and that is that they get two sets of teeth.
Yes.
They have a baby teeth, and then they have their adult teeth. Saber-toothed cats' canines were no exception. They got a baby set of canines, and then those were replaced by the adult set of canines, just like us. This poses an interesting conundrum. One study from 2015 estimated that adult Smilodon, the adult canines of Smilodon, might have taken as much as 30 months to fully erupt.
Yeah.
That 3 years of your life is waiting for these canines to finish growing in. But that's a heck of a teething period.
Seriously.
This raises all sorts of questions about what are you doing with those teeth, but it especially raises the question of what do you do in between the baby teeth and the adult teeth? And the answer seems to be that you evolve no in between.
Yeah.
In saber-toothed cats, what seems to happen is that the adult teeth grow in next to the baby canine before the baby canine is lost. The baby-toothed canine in saber-toothed cats is narrower than the adult canine and on the inside has a groove in it that the adult canine grows to sit in.
Oh, that's so weird.
This is a strategy called delayed canine shedding, which means that adolescent saber-toothed cats have double canines.
Yes.
They have a double layered canine, essentially, while that adult canine grows in. Apparently, there have been some saber-toothed cat skulls found with 2 canines in the canine socket.
Wow.
In multiple species. So this isn't just like a Smilodon thing. This seems to have been common across saber-toothed cats. It means both that you don't have to worry about not having a canine for a while.
Yes.
Obviously, you can break your canine, which is why you have to be careful. But just developmentally, that you're never going to be without your killing canine tool.
Yeah, they won't have that gap like we have when we lose a baby tooth.
Yes, exactly. It also means that adolescent saber-toothed cats would, in theory, have had stronger canines.
Yes.
Because you had 2 of them, which I saw one study, an author quoted as talking about how this not only can help protect and reinforce the adult canine before it has fully come in, but it also means that when you are a young adult saber-toothed cat, you have more leeway for making mistakes and learning how to use those teeth.
Yeah.
Because you have a stronger setup while you're getting your way to adulthood and perfecting your technique, which is a really interesting way to think about it.
Cool. This also makes sense and answers the question I was going to have, which is like, when we shed our baby teeth and our adult teeth come in, our adult teeth are hiding up inside our skull and below our teeth inside our jaw.
Yeah, they push the tooth above them out.
For a period of time, we have 2 sets of teeth in our mouth once the adult teeth have finished growing. And I couldn't figure out where you would put an adult saber-tooth for something like Smilodon inside the face.
You put it behind the other canine.
You just go ahead and grow it out as it's being grown, so you're just building it from the back as you grow it out.
Yes, hiding it tastefully behind the existing canine.
That makes so much... Because now it makes sense both from a... Now you aren't going to go from saber-tooth to no saber-tooth back to saber-tooth, but also... That's where you put a tooth that's as long as your face.
Yes.
While you're trying to grow another set of them. That's very cool.
Yeah. How much money would the Tooth Fairy give you for a baby saber-tooth? Okay. That, when we talked about this a while back with the Homotherium cub was discovered. So the frozen Homotherium baby, if you haven't heard about this, my goodness, so cool. Had the beginning of its baby sabers just beginning to grow in.
Yeah.
Which is very cool to see.
Yeah. Awesome.
So saber-toothed cats are this really fascinating circumstance where they seem to be not as different from other big cats as we might be inclined to think, but in certain more subtle but very important ways, they are different, and they are a really interesting example of specializing in your dentition, of what you can do with specialized teeth. Clearly, this is a winning strategy because Megarodonts were around for some 20 million years. They were all over the place. They were often some of the most influential and important large predators in their ecosystems. And, as we mentioned before, they are not the only, nor the first, animals to evolve saber teeth. So we're going to take a little break for some music, and then in the next half of the episode, we will run through the other times that saber teeth have evolved and the ways that they have been sometimes surprisingly similar and sometimes surprisingly not similar to the familiar saber-toothed cats. Stay tuned. Probably the most famous group of saber-toothed animals that aren't saber-toothed cats are the so-called false saber-toothed cats.
That's aptly named.
The saber-tooth is not the false part. They've got those, but they are not saber-toothed cats. This is a group called Nimravidae. The nimravids are a family, not cats. They are not within felids, although they are in carnivora.
Yeah.
Right, carnivora is the order that includes most of our mammalian carnivores, our dogs, our cats, and bears and hyenas and stuff. Nimravids seem to be closely related to true cats. They are almost true cats, but they are actually outside of felids. Nimravids are shockingly similar to megalodon saber-toothed cats. Nimravids, there are several genera. These include some mildly famous fossils like Dinictis and Hoplophonius. These are much older than megalodons. Nimravids were around from the Eocene to the Oligocene epoch, so 30 to 50 million years ago. That whole range is before saber-toothed cats themselves showed up.
Mm-hmm.
Nimravids had a similar abundance. They were found in Europe, Asia, and North America. They have basically the entire saber-tooth suite of characters. Long, flat upper canines, a wide opening jaw, that flange on the lower jaw to bolster the canine, a very powerful neck, and powerful front arms.
Yep.
Also like saber-toothed cats, they were similarly diverse. They ranged in size, a similar size range to saber-toothed cats. They also ranged from very modern cat-like to smilodon-like.
Yeah.
That range of the extremeness of these saber-tooth features. So, for example, Dinictis, which is a famous nimravid, is fairly slender, and its canines are rounded.
Mm-hmm.
They look very much like modern big cat canines. Now, false saber-toothed cats is a term that kind of, sort of, technically refers to two different groups. Nimravids, but also Barbarophilids.
Yeah.
Barbarophilids, also saber-toothed predators who lived during the Miocene, so around the same time as the early saber-toothed cats, and again, Europe, Asia, Africa, North America, very widespread. These have even more species than nimravids, the most famous one being Barbarophilus, which gives the group its name. Where Barbarophilids get weird is their phylogeny, where they actually fit in this whole story. They're confusing because they have some features that are more like nimravids and some features that are more like megalodons, the true saber-toothed cats. So various studies have suggested that they might be true cats, or they might be closer to nimravids, or they might be their own thing.
Yep.
Just a separate lineage doing their own thing. Most recent studies and some recent fossil evidence seems to suggest that they are actually part of nimravids.
Okay.
That they are a subgroup within nimravids. Based on recent papers, it seems like a consensus might be beginning to form around that, but thus far it's not super clear. If that's true, then that means that nimravids actually went from the Eocene to the Miocene and were way more diverse.
Yes.
That Barbarophilids are sort of the extreme and later end of the nimravid diversity. Overall, like I said, both groups, or the same, however they split up, Barbarophilids and nimravids are very similar to saber-toothed cats in their diversity, in their features. They also all have extreme smilodon-like forms.
Yeah.
Each group, Barbarophilus is one, Hoplophonius is one within the nimravids. This is a thing that has happened in all of these groups. They developed into that extreme, very long canine smilodon-like version. These have not only super long canines, but they also consistently have extra strong front limbs. That is a pattern that goes beyond the actual saber-toothed cats to these, quote, false saber-toothed cats. There is apparently also evidence of delayed canine eruption in nimravids and Barbarophilids, that they were doing the same 2 canine teeth at a time thing during adolescence.
These other groups are such a cool situation because when you describe saber-toothed cats to someone, they feel like this, it's easy for it to feel like this crazy one-off within cats. And like, why don't we have any now? And what were they doing that was so weird? But then you find it's like actually a bunch of their cousin carnivorous mammals also did the same thing, seemingly in the same way. Like that they were using them probably in very similar ways because they've got the same build and the same toolkit, and that they were also doing as well as the saber-toothed cats did.
Yeah, they lived on basically all the same continent, except South America, which wasn't an option at the time.
Exactly, yeah, that's not their fault.
Yep, they lived in a similar range of habitats. For a while, this was the norm.
Yeah.
For large cat and cat-like predators. Interestingly, these are all within carnivora. They all are close to felids.
Yeah, like in the feliform side of stuff.
Yes, in the feliforms. Which seems to suggest that saber-teeth likely evolved at least twice.
Yeah.
Within the true saber-toothed cats and these. Possibly more. There has been some suggestion that different subgroups within these groups might have developed saber-teeth independently.
Yeah.
It also raises the question of how much of this saber-toothed foundation is ancestral to cat-like carnivores. That the earliest cats and their cousins weren't necessarily saber-toothed, but they might have had features of the skull that set them up to very easily become saber-teeth.
Yeah, there might just be something about their skull that lends itself toward this anatomy, or that would be much more difficult to achieve in other groups of carnivorans.
Like dogs. Yeah. For some reason, it just doesn't work out in dogs, but in cats, it's really available.
Yeah.
As to your point, you asked the question, why don't we have any of this today? Right? If cats and cat-like things are so good at doing this, why don't we have saber-toothed cats today? And this has been addressed. Some researchers suggest that the answer might just be that this is a specialized form of existing, specialized enough that if the ecosystem changes, they're extra vulnerable to it. One study actually compared saber-toothed and non-saber-toothed cat and cat things over time and found that saber-toothed lineages tend to have higher extinction rates than their cone-toothed cousins, which suggests that saber-toothedness is really good until the environment begins to change.
Yeah.
At which point it might be a version of evolving yourself into a bit of a corner.
Yeah. It's and we talk about this all the time, that specialized animals are more vulnerable because they're usually need a very specific, like that, I can't remember the name of the bird, but the one whose bill is exactly as long as the flower that it gets nectar from.
Yes.
That's awesome unless that flower goes away.
Yes.
And
now you're in trouble.
Now either you don't fit the other flowers or you have too long of a bill. You have an unnecessarily specialized body feature, which isn't directly going to hurt you, but it is just a complication.
Yes.
That there's more to go wrong now because you're extra. It's also similar to, in this case, of like having a precise tool, the right tool for the right job is great, but if I just have my Leatherman and a couple of generic tools, I can get the same jobs done.
Yes.
It won't be as pretty. It won't be as...
That tool is great until someone needs a different job done.
Yes, exactly. There's a lot of situations where if I just have my hammer and my screwdriver, I can get by.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, between Nimravids, Barbarophilids, and Megalodons, we had saber-toothed cat basically things for like most of the last 50 million years. But it is important, as always, to remember that we are currently on the tail end of a pretty significant extinction event at the end of the Pleistocene, which means that probably we lost that diversity over the course of the Pleistocene because that environmental change just favored the more generalized cat shape, but also means that it is almost guaranteed that sometime in the future we will get saber-toothed cats back.
Yes.
Because it seems like a thing that they're just really good at doing.
Yeah. Which is such a bummer to have lost them. But boy...
We're in that sliver of time without saber-tooths.
Yep.
Now, all of those animals, the true saber-toothed cats and the false saber-toothed cats, like I said, all within carnivora, all within the felines and canines and that general group. Before we leave the carnivoran order, I do want to make mention of another group of saber-toothed canined carnivorans, the family Odobenidae, walruses.
Yeah!
Walruses have super long upper canines.
Yeah, those are canines.
Those are their canines that are growing crazy big out of the face. These are, we did an episode about walruses. Well, we did pinnipeds, 104, and then we did tusks, 107. Walruses are using their tusks, right? We can watch what they do. Not for hunting. Walruses hunt, bivalves and things on the bottom of the ocean floor. But they do use their canines for display. They use them for fighting each other. And don't they also use them for, like, breaking up ice and stuff?
And, like, hauling themselves out. I've seen them, like, hook the edge of the ice sheet and to get purchase. I think they'll also use it to, like, scrape up sediment to stir things up and get to bivalves. So it's more like a multi-tool.
Yes. Unsurprisingly, walruses lack many of the other saber-toothed suite features. They have reduced incisors instead of large ones. The canines are not blade-shaped. They are round. And so technically, walruses do have robust and powerful front limbs.
Yes, they do.
But not the same way.
Very short, robust.
Yeah, they're doing something a little bit different with that. Walruses are an incredible... And walruses today are not unique in that. Walruses have had these big canines since the Miocene.
Yeah.
This is sort of a fun spin on the saber-tooth concept and an example of... this is a predator, but they are not using those tusks, those canines, for hunting. They are not doing the same thing that other saber-toothed animals are.
But boy, maybe someday in the future...
Saber-toothed walruses.
We'll have ambush walruses.
I mean, they look like they've got the neck muscles for it.
Right?
I don't know. Maybe that's all blubber. But, Getting us back to saber-toothed predators as we typically think of them requires us to leave carnivora, but stay pretty close, in a group called the oxenids. The oxenids are traditionally, classically they were grouped under the group called creodonts.
Right.
Which are a very famous group of mammals found in Asia and North America. Oxenids were, they basically look, they kind of look like big cats. They've got that big mammal predator look to them, like cats or wolves. These were found during the Eocene. It seems that they mostly missed the nimravids.
Okay.
Based on the dates that I've seen, it seems like the oxenids were out around the time that nimravids came in. A few species, this wasn't fully across the group, a few species of oxenids seem to have had saber teeth.
Cool.
These include Mecharoides, Apatylurus, Diegoalurus. These, interestingly, again, a range of saber-toothedness from more like other predators to more extreme long upper canines. Oxenids were typically small. They were like dog-sized, so not quite big. And there doesn't seem to be a ton of information about their general lifestyle and stuff. But some papers I saw noted that their anatomy overall suggests that they were probably climbers.
Okay.
That they were arboreal or at least scansorial, which means, like a raccoon is scansorial.
Yes.
They don't exclusively hang out in the trees, but they can go up and down, which made me immediately think of fosses.
Yep, that's what I was just thinking of.
Which I also saw that comparison made later, that they are fossa-sized.
Yes.
These, if you don't know what fosses are, episode 40, Madagascar.
Yeah.
These are tree-dwelling, hunting, cat-like animals. And some of these had saber teeth.
Interesting.
How were they using those saber teeth? Great question.
Yeah.
Probably similarly to the other saber-toothed predators we talked about.
Yep. But yeah, now if you're hunting in a different way of a lot of them, where you're not chasing the same way or maybe not ambushing the same way.
Yeah.
Were you using them? Were they used for fighting against each other more? Or like, did you have the same uses, but you leaned more in certain ones?
Well, presumably they were hunting smaller things.
Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Cool.
So this is a thing that has shown up even outside of carnivora, and indeed even outside of placental mammals.
Yep.
So now we move to the lineage called Metatheria, to talk about Thylacosmilus.
Yes, one of my favorites.
Thylacosmilus is commonly called the marsupial saber-tooth.
Yes.
This is technically not true because it is not a marsupial.
Yes.
It is very closely related to marsupials, but it is in the bigger group that includes marsupials, which are called Metatheria. But I did see one paper that pointed that out and then said, but we're just going to call them marsupial saber-tooths because that's close enough and that's what people know it by.
Well, it's got the thing of like marsupials are only metatherians today. So when you talk about metatherians today, you're talking about marsupials.
Yes.
But much like amphibians are a specific group of non-reptilian vertebrates.
Yes.
The marsupials are a specific group of metatherians. But probably pretty similar in a lot of ways.
So Thylacosmilus, the marsupial saber-tooth, comes from South America in the Miocene to Pliocene between about 10 to 3 million years ago. Interestingly, it does disappear around the time of the Great American Biotic Interchange that brought true saber-tooth cats down to South America.
Bummer.
Thylacosmilus is roughly jaguar-sized, so big, and roughly jaguar-shaped. Again, this is all the animals we've talked about so far with the exception of walruses. They've got that very similar, just big mammal predator shape. Thylacosmilus has a bunch of the features of the suite of saber-tooth cats. They've got those again, saber teeth. Thylacosmilus upper teeth are very long, those long upper canines. They have small lower canines. They have that flange, that extra long chin on the mandible that helps buttress the teeth. They have a powerful neck. They have robust forelimbs. On the surface, they look very much like a saber-tooth cat. When you get closer, they are quite different from saber-tooth cats. For one thing, their canines were ever-growing. Yeah. They were open-rooted, which meant they grew the whole, like rodent incisors.
Yep.
They grew for the whole life of the animal. We'll have a picture in the blog post of Thylacosmilus's skull. The roots of their canines go up into the skull past the eye socket.
Yeah.
A substantial portion of their skull real estate is taken up by their canines.
It's and it is very clearly visible. You can just see this inner tube of skull.
A sheath.
Insane.
Yup. Now, interestingly, ever-growing canines were the norm for Metatherian carnivores. This wasn't exclusive to Thylacosmilus. It just took that concept and went, all right, well, ever-growing, that's what I'll do.
Do you really mean lifetime supply of canines?
Yes, this was the all-you-can-eat that saw it as a challenge. The other thing that's really interesting about Thylacosmilus is that the canines are not blade-shaped.
Yeah.
They're not narrow the way that, like, Smilodon canines are. They are, I've seen them described as almost triangular in cross-section. Again, kind of more like our canines. They also diverge slightly. In all these other saber-toothed cats, the teeth all point straight down, and thus they are parallel with each other. Thylacosmilus's big canines actually angle slightly away from each other.
Which makes it like an Oni mask.
Yes. Also, whereas other large saber-toothed cat-like predators tend to have extra big incisors, partially to take the role that the canines otherwise would be serving, Thylacosmilus has no upper incisors.
Yeah.
It's upper, like a deer.
Yeah.
The upper incisors are lost. And finally, they do have powerful necks, like we see in Smilodon and such, but their jaw muscles seem to be weaker. So while modern big cats power their bite with their jaws, and Smilodon seems to have added neck power to the bite, Thylacosmilus seems to have mostly powered its bite with its neck. This is a weird saber-tooth.
Yeah, it is.
This is a fun one because at first glance you're like, haha, saber-tooth. And then the more you look at it, you go, ooh, what are you doing? And indeed, what are they doing? This is really interesting because that's too many differences for them to just be doing the same thing as other saber-tooths. but in a slightly different way. Not blade-like canines, and canines that angle away from each other would mean that using these for a killing bite would be very difficult.
Yeah, notably inefficient.
Yes. Now, these do seem great for display, the classic showing off features. A 2020 study, which I believe we talked about in the news when it came out, so go back to 2020, did an in-depth sort of mechanical analysis of these and found that biomechanically, in terms of just engineering physics, Thylacosmilus' canines seem to be less good at stabbing in terms of the stress they resist and better at resisting pulling stress.
Yeah.
And they actually describe that the broader shape of the canines make them more like claws than like blades, which suggests that maybe they were pulling things apart with them.
Yeah.
That this might have been, for example, a disemboweling tool.
Which is so cool.
That instead of puncturing, it's sticking and then pulling and pulling its prey apart.
That, like, instead of these being daggers on your face, you had some pickaxes.
Yes.
On your face.
That same study also pointed out that the canines don't seem to show a lot of signs of wear, which means that they probably weren't coming up against hard surfaces very much. So cheetahs are often the comparison that gets made with big cat-like animals that focus on softer food, because cheetahs, very famously, don't go after bone.
Yeah.
Cheetahs specifically focus on the softest parts of the body, whereas lions are less discriminate, and hyenas are like, yes, I will eat everything.
Yum bone.
Yeah, yo, bone, delicious. Yum, 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 yum. Also, they point out that the cheek teeth, the wear on the back teeth, is similar to thylacines, which reportedly were specialists on eating organs.
Yeah.
So it might be that Thylacosmilus was focusing on softer meats, maybe pulling prey open, and maybe even a carcass specialist. That this might have been good for taking apart a carcass, either after you dispatched it or one that you found. They were specialized for doing something different and unusual.
We definitely talked about this in the news because it led to two of the best fan arts we've ever gotten.
Yes.
Which are GIFs of Thylacosmilus opening and then slurping up intestines like spaghetti.
Yes. Absolutely.
And it's so good.
Also, those authors point out that the reduced incisors, so they've got no incisors on the top and I believe smaller incisors on the bottom of the mouth. And the roof of the mouth is sort of high and arched.
Oh.
They describe it as vaulted. And those are both features that are similar to walruses.
Yeah, they are.
So Thylacosmilus might not just not be like saber-toothed cats. It's a bit like a walrus.
Yeah.
Now, probably Thylacosmilus was not sucking bivalves off of the sea floor, but they do point out that those features could be making room for an extra large tongue.
Yes.
Which we see in some similar animals. So maybe it was employing its tongue in a way to either like crush tougher flesh within the mouth, like organs, which are not always efficient to bite through, but you crush them up and the tongue might help with that. Or slurping intestines out of a carcass like spaghetti.
The image of them coming up to a open carcass and like going to the liver and just going
Yep.
and then there's no like liver anymore. It's gone.
Gone. You just go in, you stick your weird teeth in there, pull it open like you're going into a lobster.
Your can opener face.
Yes. And then just doop, 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 doop. So now that was one study from 2020.
Yes.
I haven't seen other research that has followed that up very much. So that could be wrong.
Yeah, I'm sure there are other things that these could work with.
This seems to be this, and this is often the thing that is tricky with saber teeth, is that we don't have this today.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult to just go, oh, you were just doing the same thing as this other animal, because you clearly weren't doing the same thing as any animal that we have today.
Well, especially because they're predators. And
Yeah.
like, if this was a plant-eating looking thing, it's a weird kind of tusk compared to our tusked animals today.
But we have tusked animals.
Yeah, we have lots of tusked herbivores, and we can go, okay, I can think of ways that this might be.
Sure.
Are you digging with it? Are you?
But we don't have a lot of tusked carnivores today.
No.
Walruses and like beaked whales
Yep.
are about it. So it makes it very difficult.
So cool, though.
Now, outside of Thylacosmilus, I have seen some references to other Metatherian saber-tooths, maybe? Close cousins of Thylacosmilus within the group called Sparacidonts are sometimes listed, but I've also seen researchers point out that we don't have definitive evidence of saber teeth in Thylacosmilus's relatives. So for the time being, Thylacosmilus is a lone weirdo.
Yeah.
I've also seen references to a group called deltatheroids, which were marsupial cousins in the Cretaceous and the Paleocene, as being saber-toothed. But I did a little bit of looking and I didn't find any clear description of that. If that's true, then we've had saber-toothed mammals consistently since like 80 million years ago.
Yeah.
But I don't know. So the jury's out on other saber-toothed Metatherians for the time being.
Cool.
And then to get to our final major group of famous saber-toothed predators, we have to not only go outside of Metatheria, but indeed outside of mammals.
Yep.
All the way back to the Permian period before the age of dinosaurs to a group called the Therapsids, which were non-mammals but close on the line to mammals. These were early synapsids outside of true mammals. Episode 47, we talked about these. This case, we are specifically talking about Gorgonopsians.
I can practically hear the listeners going, finally!
Fine, come on! Say Gorgonopsians already. I've been listening to this for like an hour and a half. Gorgonopsians were basically cat and dog shaped predators that lived in the mid to late Permian, so around 270 to 250 million years ago. They are mainly known from Africa and Russia. These were large predators. They ranged from smallish to tiger-sized.
Yeah, big.
Again, like modern cats, like saber-toothed cats. Gorgonopsians were among the first large land predators, period.
Yep.
They were members of some of the first land ecosystems that had the same components that we have today. Gorgonopsians have a bunch of the saber-tooth suite. They've got large upper canines. They've got large incisors. Some of them have reduced lower canines. Some of them have that flange under the chin. Some of them also have that constricted part of the mandible to make room for those teeth. And, once again, they varied in the size of their saber teeth and probably in the ways that they were using it. The largest, their version of Smilodon, included Inostrancevia, which was tiger-sized with canines up to 15 centimeters long.
Not bad.
Which is too much canine. And there were others. There was one that I read a bunch about called Smilesaurus, which is smaller but with proportionately longer canines.
Yes.
The canine, I think they're about 10 centimeters, but on a significantly smaller animal. So there were some truly Smilodon-esque saber-toothed Gorgonopsians.
Yeah.
Now, how Gorgonopsians were utilizing their saber teeth is a very interesting question, because despite the similarities, in many ways Gorgonopsians are unlike saber-toothed cats, and even unlike Thylacosmilus.
Exactly. Like, at a glance, like you said, they are predator-shaped. Like, you look at them, they are clearly a predator.
Large, quadrupedal, big head, large, sharp teeth.
But they do have, like, they have a very long body compared to a lot of our predatory mammals nowadays. Their limb proportions are different. Their skull is very differently shaped.
Yes. They look kind of like our familiar modern mammal carnivores, but they also look like those terrestrial predatory crocs from the Triassic.
Yeah.
And indeed, a lot of the ways that Gorgonopsians are different from traditional saber-toothed predators is that they are not mammals.
Yes.
They are outside of mammals, which does mean that technically these aren't canines.
Yes, exactly.
They are caniniform, they are in the canine position, and they are often simply called canines.
Yes.
But they don't have quite the same arrangement of teeth that we have in proper mammals. They also exhibited continuous tooth replacement.
Yeah.
Like crocs do.
Yeah.
So they just kept losing and replacing teeth the way that reptiles or sharks do, which meant that Gorgonopsians could sometimes have extra saber teeth or no saber teeth, depending on where they were in their cycle of sabers. One paper actually did point out that their ability to have potentially multiple saber teeth at a time might be their version of avoiding the no saber teeth situation that we talked about before.
Yep.
In some Gorgonopsians, the lower canines, typically among saber teeth, are reduced, but in others, they're bigger. So they also have kind of saber-toothed lower canines. Also, their jaws did not open quite as wide as we see in a lot of our other saber-tooths. So it might be that they were going after smaller prey. In many Gorgonopsians, the back teeth past the canines are small. Unlike, if you look at a Smilodon skull, they've reduced most of their cheek teeth, but what they've still got is a monster of a tooth.
Yes. Yep.
Gorgonopsians often have small post-canine teeth and possibly weren't doing a lot of chewing.
Yeah. Which also is in line with the tooth replacement and the less specified teeth.
Yes.
Like, if you have teeth that are functioning more like reptiles, it's not surprising that you're also probably chewing as much as many reptiles, which is not much.
Overall, they also don't have a lot of those other features of the skull, like the modifications to the brain case that tend to be similar, the musculature that we see in other saber-tooths. In fact, I have seen it noted in multiple papers that the muscles around the jaw and the anatomy of the skull is in some ways more like crocodiles or theropod dinosaurs than it is like true saber-toothed mammals.
Interesting.
Which means Gorgonopsians might have been hunting more like large dinosaurs or those terrestrial predatory crocs, where maybe they were taking large, damaging bites.
Yeah.
But not doing the hold thing in modern cats and not doing that canine shear thing necessarily that we see with Smilodon. Although, the ones with the exceptionally large canines like Enostransevia and Smilosaurus, maybe they were more like Smilodon. Maybe they were doing something a bit more similar. We don't know.
Yeah.
Now we're with Thylacospilus and especially with the Gorgonopsids, we are now in a place where we're so far removed from mammals and our modern, our more familiar saber-toothed predators that it is very hard to draw clear conclusions about what they were doing.
Well, because we're multiple layers of unrelatable, like,
we're deep. We're deep in the family tree.
Like, we don't have saber-toothed predators today, so already saber-toothed cats are a weird question of how were you being cat-like with teeth that are so unlike our cats today. Mm-hmm. We see that there were other groups that were very similar, so this was a common way to be a mammalian predator. But now we're outside of mammals with a different body shape and unrelatable prey. Like, with a lot of our other mammal predators we were talking about, they're still going to be going after small browsing mammals and deer-like animals and small rodent-like animals. None of those, and nothing that even looked like those, was running around during the Permian. Mm-hmm. So, like, would a saber-toothed cat-like tooth even be good for prey back then?
Right.
Or were you needing this weird Gorgonopsid version?
Yeah, this is 250 plus million years ago. It was a very different world for very different teeth. Interestingly, among the early synapsids, Gorgonopsians are not the only ones that we see these long upper canines in. We also see them in groups like Dinocephalians and Therocephalians, which were other groups close to mammals in the Permian and Triassic. Notably, these groups that also include seemingly saber-toothed members include carnivores, omnivores, and herbivores. Which brings us to a topic that I'm excited to discuss a bit. Saber-toothed, not predators.
Yes.
Herbivores with saber teeth. Sticking in the Permian and Triassic back in the early synapsids, the most famous examples back there are dicynodonts.
Yeah.
Dicynodonts were a very successful group of early non-mammal. I've actually seen them referred to as the most successful group of synapsids outside of true mammals.
Yup.
Dicynodonts tended to be sort of bulldog-shaped.
Yeah.
They look a lot like small horned dinosaurs.
Yeah, absolutely. They've also kind of got like a badger, like that
Yeah.
small, low to the ground sort of feel.
They were herbivores. They had a beak on their mouth. Often the beak was toothless, like we see in a lot of other herbivore specialized animals. But typically, they had large upper canines that stuck down on either side of the lower jaw. These are not called saber teeth because they're on a beaked herbivore. They're called tusks.
Yep.
But they were in the same sort of position as saber teeth. These apparently also ever growing.
Yeah.
Which is a feature we see commonly in tusks, things that we consider true tusks today.
Because those are actively used in a way that wears and tears them down. So if you don't have ever-growing tusks, you don't have tusks for very long.
Some dicynodont species actually got rid of the toothy tusks and replaced them with just bony spikes coming off the skull. So the skull just becomes a saber tooth.
Because why not?
Why waste a tooth on it?
You know, those placoderms had the right idea. Let's just make our face into teeth.
Outside of dicynodonts, there are other examples, such as tiara hudens, which is close to dicynodonts. This is an animal from Brazil, about the size of a boar, with 10 centimeter long upper long canines.
Wow.
That's like the size of a mid to large dog with 10 centimeters of canine tooth sticking down out of the mouth.
That's intense.
Now we return to the question that underlies this entire episode. Why do you have that? These are not hunting tools. These are herbivorous animals. So more likely, we come back to that original suggestion of using these for display, for defense, or for intraspecific combat, right?
Yeah.
Fighting each other. Maybe also, like you pointed out, for interacting with the environment, for digging or something. These are all uses and features that we see in the extra large canines of pigs.
Yeah.
Modern warthogs, wild hogs, babirussas very famously, have enlarged canines that are their tusks.
Yes.
These often aren't pointing down, like saber teeth. They're often curving up or out, or in the case of babirussas, up and out and then back in.
Yes, yep. Out the top of your snout. Because why?
And they use these for display. They'll use them for digging around in the soil, and they will use them probably most famously, for teaching a harsh lesson about messing with a pig that has tusks.
Yep. This is why people talk about how scary wild hogs are.
Yes. These early tusked saber-toothy synapsids very probably were doing very similar things with them. This is a trend that has also been remarkably consistent over the course of mammal history. There are a bunch of ancient mammals with similar features. Back during the Paleocene and Eocene, so shortly after the age of dinosaurs ended, the pantodonts, which were some of the first large mammal carnivores, these were dog-sized to bear-sized, some of which had enlarged upper canines.
Yeah.
Probably for the same thing. There are also uintatheres, which are rhino-like. They're close-ish. They're very similar to rhinos. Episode 129, we talked about uintatheres. Also in the Paleocene and Eocene, and these are famous because their skulls have all sorts of projections sticking off of them in all directions.
Yep.
But they also had large, flat upper canines.
Yep.
So actually they're not quite knife-shaped, but they are flatter canines, like we see in saber-toothed cats. Some uintatheres even had a flange on the chin to support that upper saber tooth.
So cool.
A bit later, But returning to South America, there's a Miocene animal called Astropitherium, which is large and taper-like. Sort of shade. It's got that sort of squat. I've seen it reconstructed with a small trunk. Astropitherium has enlarged upper and lower canines, which has been compared most often to another modern animal we have that does that, hippos. Hippos have enlarged upper canines, also enlarged lower canines, which again, display and teaching extremely harsh lessons.
And being the deadliest thing in Africa.
Yes. So we see this trend of tusk-like canines in herbivores that are using them to defend themselves or using them to show off to, mates and rivals and stuff, has been a very consistent trend. Maybe the most, I don't know if they're the most famous example, but they do seem to be the most apropos example in an episode about saber-teeth, are saber-toothed deer.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of these.
Yes, it's not just like one-off weird group. There are numerous members.
There's a bunch. The family Tragulidae, which are also called chevretanes or mouse deer. These are very small. These are like a foot tall. They live in southern Asia. They look like a deer. They are not deer. They are not true deer. They're actually outside of the group Pecora, which is where like deer and giraffes and cows and stuff are. So these are separated out. They have large upper canines, larger in the males, that stick down out of the mouth.
Yeah.
While they're just walking around, you can see them with those canines sticking down out of the mouth. We have fossils of these going back to the Miocene.
Cool.
These upper canines are used in display and in males will fight each other with them.
Yeah.
There's also Moschidae, musk deer, which are also native to southern and I think southeastern Asia. Also not deer. Musk deer are actually closer to bovids.
Okay,
so goats and sheep and stuff. Again, males have very long canines, also known back to the Miocene, so this has been a very consistent thing. And in musk deer, these saber teeth can swivel.
Yeah.
They can shift forward to go into fight mode, and then they can shift back to make room for eating food.
Which sounds like a thing that a video game or like comic book thing would do.
Yeah.
But
you just stow those like viper fangs.
Yes.
They fold out when it's time to use them.
It's so cool.
Which is extremely cool. These have very long canines. Like musk deer, it's like, with cartoons that love to do that trend of we're going to draw a prehistoric animal and we're going to make it just a modern animal but give it saber teeth to show that it is prehistoric. That's what musk deer look like.
Yep.
They look like a Flintstones character.
Like, and when you see them, you can see it sticking out of the mouth. But then if you see the skull, it looks like you were just saying, looks poorly
fabricated.
This
is a fake that somebody glued these teeth into.
Like, it doesn't look like the artist should have been more subtle.
Yes. Yeah, if you're going to try to convince us. But then there are also saber-toothed deer that are true deer. There are multiple groups of these. There are a couple within the Muntiacini, which include tufted deer, as well as muntjacs, which are also called barking deer. And in a completely other part of the deer family tree, the genus Hydropodes, which are water deer.
Yeah.
All of these also in southern and southeastern Asia. That seems to be where you go to be a saber-toothed deer. All with big upper canines, all of which they swivel.
Yeah.
So the swiveling canine is a convergent feature.
So cool.
So not only have deer and deer-like things repeatedly evolved these large upper canines, they've repeated, because they have the problem that saber-toothed cats don't have, which is that their upper weird canines are in the way.
Yes.
When they want to eat efficiently. So they have to get them out of the way by hinging them and sweeping them back. Funnily enough, considering that these are being used for display and for fighting each other, muntjacs also have antlers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is really doubling down on the whole concept.
I'm adding as many spikes to my face as possible.
It does make a lot of our spooky creatures feel more reasonable.
Oh, yes.
That there is this group today that does do that, where they're like, yeah, listen, I don't have antlers all the time. have these canines.
Well, it's like I've seen fantasy creatures where they will, add sharp teeth to a fantasy deer or something
Like a
similar.
moose.
Yeah. And
that was in Avatar.
The saber-toothed moose.
The saber-toothed moose lion.
And very often when those are portrayed that way, it has an air of silliness of like, so you added scary teeth to this not very scary animal, and that absolutely makes sense and may have been what happened. Like, we don't know that artist was inspired by any of these animals.
Right.
But it's not actually ridiculous. It's a lot of them have done it.
An air of silliness, I think, describes muntjacs pretty well.
Yes.
So this is a saber teeth, not just for predators. You can get this in a lot of herbivores, and especially in these large-bodied, ungulate herbivores. One more example to mention, and I wouldn't even mention this if it weren't for the name that has been given to this thing. Oncorhynchus restrosus, the saber-toothed salmon.
Yes.
We talked about this in the news not too long ago. This is a giant salmon that is known from the Miocene and Pliocene of Pacific Ocean deposits that has giant premaxillary teeth, so way up in the front of the skull, and has been traditionally called the saber-toothed salmon. A study in 2024 reassessed the fossils and found that those, quote, saber teeth appear to not stick down, but stick out.
Yes.
Like tusks.
Yep.
So they were probably using them like tusks. I guess if we're talking, I should mention stiletto snakes.
I was going to say.
Also do the same thing.
Yep.
But they are not, those authors said the salmon are probably using these for fighting each other or also potentially for nest building.
Yeah.
Which a lot of fish will do that. Stiletto snakes, not using them for really any of those things. Once we're back to hunting tools.
Yes.
In stiletto snakes. So there's all of these fascinating saber-toothed. This is a thing that has happened dozens of times across mostly mammals, but not exclusively mammals. Now, before we wrap everything up, there is one more topic that I think is extremely important for us to talk about that I feel like just a few years ago might not have been so much. And that is the question of what saber-toothed animals looked like on the outside with all of their flesh intact.
Yes.
This has been a subject of extensive debate. And the argument has kind of gone, well, modern big cats, the canines do not stick outside of the skull. Even things like clouded leopards with extra long canines. And then the other side of the argument has been, yeah, but look at Smilodon.
Yeah, how in the world would it not?
So this question of, artists forever have depicted saber-toothed cats with the saber teeth outside of the skull.
Yeah, where the furry part of the head has more or less the same profile as modern big cats, and then the long tooth poking out of those lips.
Yes. And in their defense, like we just talked about, saber-toothed deer do look like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's for real.
Deer face, teeth poking out.
Yes. Recently, there have been a couple of papers recently that have really dived into this. Some famous papers in 2022 and 2024 that did detailed examinations of fossil skulls, but also modern animals, doing dissections and CT scanning and live observations to see what happens when you open and close your mouth. And they noted that in modern cats, even with the long canines, they are covered when the mouth is closed. The lips tend to be loose and wide. And when they close their mouth, the lower lip folds around those canines.
Yeah.
So they have space.
As like a pocket.
Yes. On the other hand, musk deer and walruses and even like red foxes and Tasmanian devils they mentioned, when the mouth is closed, those canines actually do stick out. Mm-hmm. We see that in the deer, obviously in walruses. But yeah, look at a red fox with its mouth closed, and you see just like the little tip of that canine hanging below the lip. In those mammals, the researchers noted that consistently what they see is that the lower jaw is narrow, and the upper canines are more widely spaced from each other, which means the canines don't sit flush against the lower jaw, and there's room for the lips.
Yes.
This then informed their examinations of saber-toothed cats. They looked at Homotherium, extremely widespread and famous. Homotherium has moderately long canines. That flange on the mandible, that low extended chin, is long enough to match the length of the canines.
Yes.
So there's no canine extends below the bone. In Homotherium, the width of the canines is quite narrow, which means that canine tooth sits just about right up against the lower jaw, which they point out is less like things like musk deer and red foxes and more like modern cats, where there probably wasn't enough room to fit the lips in between the jaw and the tooth.
You'd be scraping your own skin.
Yes. Yeah, you'd be puncturing your lips to do it. So they concluded, most likely Homotherium had concealed saber teeth.
Yeah.
Smilodon has very long canines. And interestingly, and I didn't mention this earlier, that flange on the lower jaw is highly reduced in Smilodon.
Like,
you'd expect them to have a longer one.
Yes.
They actually have a shorter one.
Like, when you look at its lower jaw, if I just gave you the lower jaw without anything else and you were not a cat expert, it looks pretty similar.
Yeah, this could be a tiger's lower jaw.
There is a flange there once you compare it and you go, all right, yeah, there's a flat, like a thumb impression on either side of the chin. But that's about all it looks like.
Yes. So they've done away with that support on the side of the teeth. Also, they have a narrower lower jaw and their upper canines are more widely spaced, which is more similar to things like musk deer.
Yes.
So these authors concluded that most likely Smilodon did have exposed canines. And then, to drive home one of the points that I've been making this whole episode, they also looked at Meganterion, which is an early member of the Smilodon lineage, not quite as extreme as Smilodon. Meganterion has the flange, but it is shorter than the canines are.
Yeah.
The canines stick out a couple centimeters longer than the flange, and it has narrow lower jaw, wide upper mandibles, likely exposed canines, but not quite as dramatic as Smilodon.
Yes.
So this appears to be an intermediate form. So again, it also isn't as clear-cut as either they're exposed or they're not. Some of them might have been like clouded leopards, with longer canines that are covered, and some of them might have been like red foxes, with not terribly long canines that do stick out under the lips.
Yeah.
They noted most saber-toothed cats, most machaerodonts, have moderate-sized canines with the flange that matches. Those extra long canines and the lacking of the flange seems to be a Smilodon line thing. Like I said way at the beginning, Smilodon is not a typical example of a saber-toothed cat, so it might be that the exposed canines are a specifically Smilodon and its close relatives feature.
Yeah. Well, and this is such a cool example of this kind of question. Because, this sort of questions come up with, like, do predatory dinosaurs, do theropods have lips? And the debate as to would the teeth need to be protected from being exposed to the air or not? And when we look at modern reptiles, we have lipped lizards, but lipless crocodilians. And I like this example because it demonstrates of, like, it might depend.
Yeah. It might be both.
Like, T-Rex might have had too big of teeth to have lips, but your average Tyrannosaur might have been fine.
Right.
It's hard to know, and there's an example animal almost for each situation, so you really have to start looking in at the nitty-gritty of specifically how are you shaped. You might be doing this scenario.
So cool.
It's awesome.
Outside of saber-toothed cats, generally speaking, the authors point out that saber-toothed other things tend to have deep flanges that match the teeth. Even things like Thylacosmilus has the weirdest skull.
Yep.
The flange on Thylacosmilus is frankly ridiculous.
It's so crazy looking.
It's extremely goofy. So the authors point out that based on the sort of general situation we see with saber-toothed cats, most saber-toothed predators, probably the canines were concealed.
Yes.
Probably they slotted into the lower jaw, into the lips that folded around them, and they were hidden, which again, like hippos, are like that. Hippos have wildly huge, dangerous canines, but you don't see them until the hippo decides to show them to you.
Yeah.
They also point out, of course, that other groups of animals would have different soft tissue arrangements.
Yes.
So, what does a large saber-toothed marsupial-like thing, lip situation look like? It might be very different.
Yeah.
And gorgonopsids, who knows? Who knows what they had going on?
Yep. Well, and it also brings up the question of, did your lower lip pocket along that flange come all the way up?
Mm-hmm.
Or did your upper lips come down to meet it, so it wasn't quite as it wasn't a sock, it was a half pocket.
Yeah, you meet halfway.
Yeah, and so
you just have big dog lips on the top,
mastiff,
yes.
jowls. But there's so much variety that still could be there with exactly how your soft tissue is handling, and once again could just be different species to species.
Mm-hmm.
This is a jowly saber-tooth. This one isn't. It's just all chin.
Yep.
It's just normal upper lips, big, long, furry pockets on either side of the chin. And so draw them as you please.
So the answer seems to, most likely, based on what we have, the answer seems to be most saber-toothed animals, especially saber-toothed predators, probably the canines were concealed.
Yes.
Probably they were hidden inside the mouth, under the lips, when the jaw was closed. But in extreme cases, they might have shifted to be more like musk deer with the exposed teeth. And those extreme cases could just be limited to Smilodon.
Yeah, exactly.
There were other extremely long ones, and stuff like the Dicynodonts with their long tusks were almost certainly sticking out of the mouth because that was part of the point of them.
Mm-hmm.
But among the saber-toothed predators, Smilodon, again, was a weird one. So how widespread was the exposed canines? That is hard to say.
Yeah.
Saber teeth, such a cool topic.
It really is.
I had so much fun going through and learning all about the different saber-toothed critters. It is so fun to get this sense of, this is one of those features that has evolved over and over again, but not for the same purpose.
Yeah.
That there is a diversity of saber teeth and saber-toothed animals and what they're using those for. It turns out that the canines are just a really great opportunity to develop a big tooth for whatever you need a big tooth for.
Well, a long, sharp structure is such a useful tool. That horns, claws, spines, teeth, we see it used over and over again, and your canines in mammals are the long, sharp teeth.
That's what you got.
So it makes absolute sense that evolution would select for them to become a similar kind of tool as these other body parts.
Yeah. One other example I didn't mention, actually, is whales.
Yeah.
Narwhals.
Yep.
The narwhal tusk is also a long canine. I didn't mention that because that is just so far outside the scope.
That's a javelin toothed.
Is the beaked whales, is it a canine?
I think they are canines.
There you go. Episode 172, we talked about toothed whales.
I don't actually, because
They might be inside.
I can't remember because I'm pretty sure those are the only teeth they have.
So we might not know which teeth they are.
Though they've lost, they might have remnants of but they are functionally toothless because they feed with suction. They inhale fish and squid and then have those weird tusks sticking up. So I don't actually remember.
I'm positive you said it in episode 172. So go listen to that, all about toothed whales. Hey, before we wrap up the episode for Finally Done, we have one more thing to do, and that is our patron question. Every episode, we answer a question submitted by our patrons, which is one of the perks you can get by supporting our science communication efforts on Patreon, link in the episode description. Will, what's our question today?
Our question is from Joao. How deep should we dig for fossils? Given that all the fossils we'll ever find are already in the ground somewhere, should we go crazy and dig it all out, or just dig whatever comes near the surface?
This is a great question. There are fossil-rich rocks and sediments about as deep as you could ask for them to be. Especially, I mean, at a subduction zone, you are having some fossil sedimentary rocks being pulled down into the mantle and melted back down.
Yep.
So there are fossils basically at lots of depths. How deep we dig for fossils tends to be more of a question of logistics than of aspirations.
Yes.
Digging deeply into the earth is very difficult, and you don't know that there's going to be fossils worth digging up there until you get there.
Yeah.
That's the trick with paleontology, is that generally speaking, you don't know what you're going to find until you find it. So digging on the surface is much easier, and it's a safer bet.
Yes.
Because then if you don't find anything, you didn't spend a lot of time or money or effort to do it. But there are examples where, so for example, road cuts are an excellent example of this, when we will just carve a path through a hill or a mountain to put a highway in there. That involves sometimes digging tens or even hundreds of feet down into the hillside, exposing the rocks. And road cuts are often great places to find fossils.
Yes.
So you can get fossils way deep underground. The Gray Fossil Site was 30 feet underground, and it extends more than 100 feet deep. So you can get, and then of course there are cave fossils that are deep within the earth. So we could dig the entire crust up and find lots and lots of fossils we might never otherwise see. That's just not a very practical way to do it.
Yeah. The thought it brings up to me, which is a sci-fi thought, but it is likely real in our future somewhere, is the idea of like mining asteroids, which comes up because there are certain minerals and metals on our planet that are extremely rare and that we know are, if not crazy common, surprisingly common in space rocks. You know, that we are able to scan them and be like, yeah, that's got a whole bunch of gold in it and a whole bunch of these other
iridium.
Yeah. But especially right now where it's impossible, but even in the near future, the infrastructure, time, and danger and difficulty of going to get those minerals will cost thousands of times more than the value of those minerals.
Yes. It's similar to the reason why we don't do a lot of fossil hunting on the ocean floor.
Exactly.
They're there.
Yes.
The ocean floor is collecting fossils. I was going to say just like everywhere else. Honestly, better than most other places.
Yep.
But in order to get it, typically we have to use massive drills to drill up chunks of the sea floor. It is not practical for us to go down and dig on the sea floor.
And the drill will only work with certain kinds of fossils. If we wanted to do an excavation, that means we have to get in a submersible that can handle the pressures, which can usually only hold like 3 people and can only be down there for a matter of hours at most. Each session of trying to dig and excavate those fossils would be costing thousands of dollars.
Yes.
And it's we're not doing it for the capitalism reasons that the mining is for. But we do still have to factor in of there's only so much money in the budget. There's only so much funding. We, as individuals, only have so much time. It's
also dangerous.
It's dangerous. Yes.
It is like digging out in the Badlands. Even digging in the Badlands, it comes with risks, comes with costs. But there's a reason why we have done comparatively less digging in Antarctica.
Yeah.
Or even in like the upper parts of Alaska, the Arctic and stuff. Those are harder to access. And they're easier to make a mistake.
Yeah, for something to go wrong.
Yes. Or like we've talked in the past about cave diving for fossils. Diving into a cave to excavate fossils is a logistical nightmare.
Yes.
Because the people who are qualified to actually go cave diving are not the people who are qualified to dig up and interpret the fossils. So our colleagues who we've talked to about this explain the process of sending the cave divers down into the cave. They come back. They show you the pictures of what they found. You give them the detailed instructions. They go and try to follow the detailed instructions, all the while taking extra precautions to make sure that the fossils are safe in their subaquatic environment. And most importantly, that the people are safe.
Yes.
Under water and underground at the same time, which is a truly terrifying prospect. So excavating there are fossils basically everywhere.
Yes.
If you find a rock, there is an extremely good chance there's fossils in it. We could excavate every rock on the planet, but where we dig for fossils is really a balance between our likelihood of finding something useful and the risk of not finding anything useful.
Yes.
And in a lot of places, it is fully not worth the risk to go looking for them.
And even if we had like the magic Jurassic Park ground radar,
Which we don't.
Yeah, we don't. That's not how it works. But even if we had a way to just go boop and say, all right, 2 miles down,
There's a T-Rex down there.
There's a T-Rex here. 300 feet down over here, we have some marine fossils. Like, even if we were able to get a pinpoint throughout the rocks, that now has to become a mining operation. Yeah. Well, we're going to have to make a mine shaft and send people down into a mine, which is a hazardous, difficult place to be.
Yes. We've talked about that exact situation at the Gray Fossil Site, because a very common question people get is, if the sediment goes down over 100 feet, why are you only digging up at the surface?
Yes.
And the answer is, because if we dig deeper than that, we are building a mine shaft.
Yep.
We only go down like 10 feet, because any deeper than that, now the walls could collapse, and now it is a different type of operation.
Yes. And just like the diving, most paleontologists aren't miners.
Yes.
And so you would need to bring on a mining crew to figure that out. And it's just the practicality and cost versus benefits analysis. It makes much more sense. They will eventually be eroded to the surface for most of the layers. And if we just wait and keep an eye out, we will be able to just kind of go pick them up with minimal effort.
Yes. So, Joao, if you come up with a super cool method for finding fossils deep underground that doesn't cost a lot of money and doesn't put human lives in danger, go make bajillions of dollars.
Trained moles.
Get trained moles. That's what we need. Thank you for that question. That is very fun to think about the logistics of paleontology. Thank you to all of you, dear listeners, who have joined us for this very fun episode of the podcast. Check out the blog post. We're going to put a bunch of pictures. There's going to be so many pictures of saber-toothed skulls and pictures of goofy-looking deer with their canines sticking out. Go check it out. There'll also be some links to a bunch of the papers and references and other places that you can find more information. Big thanks to all the people who requested this topic. Very fun. Big thanks to our new patrons. Big thanks to all of our patrons. And an extra big thanks to our toppest, most toppity tier patrons, Danielle the Bug Lover, Jeff Ellington, and Sarah May. We appreciate it so much.
Yeah.
Listeners, we got a whole bunch of stuff going on. April's coming up, and we will be having Silver Screen Science on Planet of the Apes. And then
no saber-teeth.
No saber-teeth.
Yeah.
And at least not in the movies that we've seen. And then the summer's around the corner, and Croc and Snake Month are coming up. Leave It to Us is out there in the world, so you can listen to the pilot episodes, and the whole series is coming up pretty soon as well.
Yay.
We release episodes every fortnight, so join us again in a fortnight for more episode. Next episode's 215, which means plants. There's going to be plants, which means we don't have to do as much work. Which is great, because this episode was big and weird.
Yeah, there's a lot more groups than I think most people would expect to show up in an episode about saber-teeth.
Can't wait to put the blog post pictures together. Oh, this is going to be so good. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Common Descent Podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and check our WordPress blog for pictures and links after each episode. Huge thanks to our patrons whose support helps keep this podcast running and who get access to bonus goodies on Patreon. The song you're hearing is called On the Origin of Species by Protodome, which we found at ocremix.org. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time.